some mountains don't wait for permission to bury their secrets. Berthoud Pass cuts through the Continental Divide at an elevation of 11,307 feet, connecting Empire to Winter Park along a winding stretch of Highway 40 that has claimed more vehicles and lives than the Colorado Department of Transportation publicly acknowledges. Named after Captain Edward Berthoud, who surveyed the route in 1861 for a proposed transcontinental railroad, the pass has always been a place of transit, a corridor between one Colorado and another where the weather changes within minutes and the snowpack behaves according to its own logic. The terrain on either side of the highway rises steeply into alpine bowls and narrow chutes, many of which have been studied extensively by avalanche researchers from the Colorado Avalanche Information Center. By the 1970s, Berthoud Pass had become one of the most documented avalanche zones in North America, with ski patrols conducting controlled releases throughout winter and maintaining detailed logs of every significant slide. The pass saw regular backcountry traffic, ski tourers, ice climbers, and the occasional winter camper willing to brave temperatures that regularly dropped below -20. February of 1978 had been a relatively stable month. A persistent, weak layer that had formed in early January was buried deep enough to no longer pose immediate concern, and the snowpack had consolidated under moderate temperatures. The avalanche danger on the morning of February 14th was rated as low to moderate across most aspects. Wind loading had been minimal for nearly a week. None of this explained what happened at 3:47 that morning. The first report came from a state highway maintenance worker named Douglas Freiberg, who was driving a snowplow westbound toward Winter Park. He later told investigators that he felt the road shudder beneath his vehicle, followed by a sound he described as 3 doors slamming at once, but from inside the mountain. His headlights caught the tail end of snow dust settling across the highway, approximately 200 yards ahead. He radioed dispatch at 3:51. By the time Clear Creek County search and rescue arrived at dawn, they discovered that 3 separate avalanches had released within the same 60-second window. The first had occurred on a north-facing slope above the old ski area. The second had broken loose on a southeast-facing chute nearly half a mile away. The third had released on a west-facing aspect across the highway, in a zone that had been deemed stable enough to not require monitoring that season. Each slide had fractured cleanly at the crown, with nearly identical depth measurements of approximately 90 centimeters. Each had run a similar distance before depositing debris across terrain that had not seen significant avalanche activity in over a decade. And each debris field, when probed that afternoon, contained items belonging to a man named Walter Jessup. Walter Jessup was a 34-year-old machinist from Idaho Springs who had been reported missing on February 11th after failing to return from a solo ice climbing trip near Georgetown. His vehicle had been found at the Guanella Pass trailhead, 6 miles southeast of Berthoud Pass, with no indication that he had ever traveled toward the pass itself. Search teams had spent 2 days combing the Georgetown area without success. No footprints, no equipment, no witnesses who had seen him after the morning of February 10th. The discovery of his belongings at Berthoud Pass made no geographic sense. Myra Svensson, the volunteer coordinator for the initial search near Georgetown, remembered the moment she received the radio call. They said they'd found a glove with his name written inside, then a stuff sack with his medication, then, from the third site, his journal. She paused during a 1992 interview with a graduate researcher from the University of Colorado. We asked them to repeat the locations. We thought there had been a miscommunication, 3 different debris fields, same man's belongings. But Walter had never been to Berthoud Pass, at least not according to anything we knew. Douglas Freiberg, the plow driver, was interviewed multiple times over the following weeks. His account remained consistent, though one detail troubled investigators. "Before I felt the shudder," he said, "I saw something in my mirrors, just for a second, like someone standing on the shoulder, maybe 300 feet back, but when I looked again, there was nothing, and then the road moved. Rangers who examined the debris fields noted an unusual characteristic. The items belonging to Jessup appeared to have been distributed deliberately. The glove was found near the center of the first debris field. The stuff sack was located at an almost identical position in the second. The journal, waterlogged and partially frozen, lay at the geometric center of the third. Probability analysis conducted later by CAIC researchers suggested the odds of such precise placement occurring naturally across 3 separate slides were, in their words, statistically negligible. The journal itself offered little clarity. Most entries were mundane: weather observations, gear lists, reflections on a recent divorce. The final entry, dated February 10th, read simply, "Decided to change plans. Heading somewhere quieter. Need to think." No explanation of where, no mention of Berthoud Pass. The Colorado Avalanche Information Center opened a formal investigation in late February of 1978. Their preliminary report, submitted in April, concluded that the simultaneous release of 3 avalanches on different aspects under stable conditions was anomalous but not unprecedented, citing rare instances of synchronized fractures caused by subsurface seismic activity or deep temperature fluctuations. However, the United States Geological Survey confirmed that no seismic events had been recorded within 50 miles of Berthoud Pass that night. Temperature data from nearby weather stations showed no unusual variations. A supplementary report, drafted in June but never formally published, noted additional inconsistencies. The crown fractures of all 3 avalanches appeared to have initiated at precisely the same depth, suggesting a shared trigger mechanism. Yet the slopes faced different directions, received different amounts of solar radiation, and had developed under different wind patterns throughout the season. The snowpacks, wrote CAIC analyst Robert Jung, should not have behaved identically. They did. Jung requested funding to conduct further investigation, including ground-penetrating radar surveys of the slide paths. His request was denied. In a handwritten note found in his archived files, he wrote, "Something connected those slopes. I don't know if it was below the snow or within it." Walter Jessup's body was never recovered. Despite extensive probing and 2 additional searches conducted in March, no human remains were found in any of the 3 debris fields. His belongings were returned to his family in April. The case was officially closed as a death by misadventure, with the location of death listed as unknown, presumed Berthoud Pass vicinity. His sister, Eleanor Jessup Moran, contested this conclusion until her death in 2004. In a letter to the Clear Creek County Sheriff's Department written in 1983, she asked a question that no one has adequately answered. If Walter was buried in one of those slides, where is his body? And if he wasn't, how did his things get inside 3 different avalanches that happened at the same time? The letter received no formal response. In the years since, Berthoud Pass has continued to produce avalanches, some natural, some triggered by ski patrol, all documented with the rigorous precision that has made Colorado's avalanche monitoring among the best in the world. The events of February 14, 1978, are occasionally referenced in training materials as an example of unexplained synchronous release, though instructors rarely elaborate beyond the basic facts. Douglas Freiberg drove the Berthoud Pass route for another 12 years before retiring in 1990. He never saw the figure on the shoulder again, though he admitted in a 2001 interview that he sometimes looked for it. "Every time I drove that stretch at night," he said, "I'd check my mirrors around that same spot, just in case. I don't know what I expected to see, maybe nothing, maybe someone trying to get home." The 3 slide paths have since revegetated with alpine willow and krummholz. The old ski area closed permanently in 2002. Highway 40 still crosses the pass, though it is frequently closed during winter storms. On clear nights, locals say the pass is quieter than it should be, a silence that feels less like peace and more like something waiting to exhale. Walter Jessup's journal remains in the possession of his family. The final page, according to his nephew, is blank except for a single sentence written in pencil along the bottom margin, in handwriting that does not match the rest of the entries. It reads, "They fall together." No one knows who wrote it. The snow was singing again the night before it buried everything. Loveland Basin sits at the foot of the Continental Divide, 11 miles west of Georgetown, along Interstate 70. At an elevation of nearly 13,000 feet at its highest ridgeline, it is one of the highest ski areas in North America and among the first to open each season due to its reliable early snowfall. The terrain is stark and exposed, above treeline for most of its acreage, shaped by wind that rarely stops and temperatures that can shift 40 degrees in a single afternoon. The basin takes its name from William Loveland, a railroad executive who surveyed the region in the 1860s. But long before surveyors arrived, the Ute people avoided extended stays in the high cirques above the valley, referring to the area in terms that early translators rendered as the place where the wind speaks wrong. Anthropologists have debated the precise meaning of this phrase for decades. Some suggest it references the unusual acoustic properties of the bowl-shaped terrain. Others believe it was a warning. By the early 1980s, Loveland Basin had developed a reputation among ski patrollers for unpredictable snowpack behavior. The northern chutes, in particular, seemed to fracture under conditions that should have been stable and remain intact when every model predicted release. Veteran patrollers learned to trust their instincts over their training manuals when working those slopes. But instinct could not explain what maintenance worker Gerald Okonkwo heard on the night of January 7, 1983. Okonkwo was conducting a routine inspection of snowmaking equipment near the base of Chair 4 when he noticed a sound drifting down from the upper mountain. He initially assumed it was wind moving through the lift infrastructure. Cables and towers often produce tonal hums under certain conditions. But as he listened, he realized the sound was not mechanical. It was layered, almost harmonic, rising and falling in patterns that reminded him of distant choral music. "I thought someone had left a radio on up there," he told supervisors the following morning. "But there was no one on the mountain. I was the only one." At 3:22 that morning, a significant avalanche released on the North Chute, a slope that had been skied the previous afternoon without incident. The debris field covered nearly 400 vertical feet and deposited snow across a service road that Okonkwo had walked less than 2 hours earlier. The incident was logged as a natural release triggered by overnight temperature fluctuations. Okonkwo's report about the singing was noted, but not investigated. 15 months later, in April of 1984, the sound returned. This time, 3 people heard it: lift operator Susan Makiajewski, night security guard Theodore Bain, and a graduate student named Harold Fontaine, who was conducting snowpack research for Colorado State University. All 3 were in different locations on the mountain. All 3 described the same phenomenon, a sustained polyphonic tone that seemed to emanate not from above the snow but from within it. Maciejewski, stationed in the Chair 2 operator booth, called it like a church choir warming up but underwater. Bain, making rounds near the patrol headquarters, said it reminded him of the sound a wine glass makes when you run your finger around the rim, except it kept changing pitch. Fontaine, collecting temperature readings near the ridgeline, recorded the most clinical description: harmonic oscillation with at least 3 distinct frequency layers, duration approximately 14 minutes, source direction indeterminate. At 4:17 that morning, an avalanche released on a slope adjacent to the North Chute. Fontaine witnessed the crown fracture from his position on the ridge. He later wrote in his field notes that the singing stopped at the exact moment the slab began to move, as if someone had turned off a switch. Fontaine attempted to include his observations in his thesis research, but his faculty advisor discouraged him from pursuing the acoustic anomaly. He told me it would undermine the credibility of my other findings, Fontaine recalled in a 2008 interview. He said snow doesn't sing. I told him I knew what I heard. He said that was exactly the problem. By 1986, the phenomenon had occurred twice more, always preceding significant avalanche activity on the northern aspects. Loveland Basin Management, concerned about liability and reputation, declined to investigate formally, but quietly authorized the installation of audio monitoring equipment near the most active slide paths. The equipment was maintained by the ski patrol and operated only during overnight hours when the mountain was closed. The recordings captured something that no one could easily dismiss. On February 19, 1987, audio sensors detected a sustained tone beginning at 1:43 in the morning. The frequency analysis, conducted later by an acoustics consultant hired by the ski area, identified three overlapping harmonic frequencies: 218 Hz, 436 Hz, and 654 Hz. These corresponded to the musical notes A, and E, forming what musicians would recognize as an open fifth chord. The consultant, Dr. Patricia Yamamoto of the University of Denver, noted that such precise harmonic relationships were inconsistent with known atmospheric or geological acoustic phenomena. Wind noise typically produces broad spectrum sound without clear pitch. Settling snow generates low-frequency rumbles. Nothing in her experience explained how a snowpack could produce a musical chord. At 2:11 that morning, an avalanche released on the North Chute. The singing ceased at 2:10. Dr. Yamamoto requested copies of the recordings for further analysis. She was told that the original tapes had been sent to the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration's Environmental Research Laboratory in Boulder for review. When she contacted NOAA directly, she was informed that no such recordings had been received. Loveland Basin's patrol director at the time, Marcus Lindholm, maintained until his retirement in 1994 that the tapes were shipped to Boulder via certified mail. The tracking number, according to documents later obtained through a Freedom of Information Act request, showed the package arriving at NOAA's mailroom on March 3, 1987. Internal routing logs showed no record of where it went after that. Someone received it, Lindholm said during a 2001 interview for a documentary that was never completed. Someone signed for it, but no one ever saw it again, and no one at NOAA would tell me who had requested it in the first place. The final recorded incident occurred on December 28, 1991. By then, the audio monitoring equipment had been removed, officially due to budget cuts, though some former patrol members suggest the decision came from higher up the corporate chain. Without recordings, the only evidence of the singing that night came from a single witness, a ski patroller named Elena Dvorak, who was conducting an early morning sweep of the upper mountain. Dvorak reported hearing the harmonic tone for approximately 20 minutes while she traversed above the North Chute. She described it as the most beautiful and most wrong sound I've ever heard. It was coming from everywhere and nowhere. I felt it in my teeth. She radioed patrol headquarters to report the anomaly. The dispatcher logged the call at 5:37. At 5:41, a Class 4 avalanche released on the slope directly below Dvorak's position. She survived only because she had paused to adjust her bindings on a rocky outcrop that remained above the debris field. I watched it go, she said, in a 1993 deposition related to an unrelated liability case. The whole slope just dropped, and the moment it started moving, the singing stopped. Not faded, stopped. Like whatever was making the sound had finished what it was doing. Dvorak left Loveland Basin at the end of that season and never returned to avalanche work. She declined multiple interview requests over the following decades. According to colleagues who remained in contact, she never spoke about the incident again. The northern chutes at Loveland Basin continue to produce regular avalanche activity, monitored now by modern forecasting techniques and controlled release protocols. No unusual acoustic phenomena have been officially reported since 1991. The original audio recordings from the 1980s have never been located. Dr. Yamamoto continued her research into anomalous environmental acoustics until her retirement in 2012. In her final published paper, she included a brief footnote referencing unexplained harmonic signatures documented at a Colorado ski area in the late 20th century, noting that the data remained inaccessible despite repeated inquiries. Gerald Okonkwo, the maintenance worker who first heard the singing in 1983, returned to the mountain once in 2009, nearly 3 decades after that January night. He stood at the base of Chair 4 as the afternoon light faded, and the lifts fell silent for the evening. "I listened for maybe an hour," he said afterward. "I didn't hear anything, just wind, just normal wind." He paused. "But I'll tell you something. The wind up there has a way of almost sounding like something else, like it's trying to form words, or maybe like it's covering them up." The Ute phrase for the basin has never been fully translated to anyone's satisfaction. The most recent scholarly attempt, published in a 2016 linguistics journal, suggested an alternative reading: not the place where the wind speaks wrong, but the place where something speaks through the wind. The difference, some researchers argue, is significant. Others say it doesn't matter. The snow falls the same either way. And every winter, the northern chutes hold their weight until they decide not to, sometimes in silence, sometimes preceded by something that sounds almost like music, if music could come from inside the cold itself. No one monitors for the sound anymore, but every few years, someone on the mountain hears something they can't quite explain, files no report, and never mentions it again. Some things happen on schedule, even when nothing is scheduling them. Red Mountain Pass climbs to 11,018 feet between Ouray and Silverton in the San Juan Mountains of southwestern Colorado. The stretch of Highway 550 that crosses it is widely considered one of the most dangerous paved roads in North America, a narrow, winding corridor carved into terrain so steep and unstable that the Highway Department has identified more than 60 avalanche paths capable of reaching the roadway. In heavy snow years, the pass closes repeatedly, sometimes for days at a time. Travelers who attempt the crossing in winter do so with the understanding that the mountains operate according to their own logic. The San Juans are old, ancient volcanic remnants worn down to jagged ridges and unstable slopes that shed snow with little provocation. Mining operations in the late 19th century left the region pockmarked with abandoned tunnels and tailing piles, many of which have since collapsed or been absorbed back into the landscape. Ghost towns dot the high valleys: Ironton, Guston, Red Mountain Town itself, communities that thrived briefly on silver and then vanished when the ore ran out or the winters proved too brutal. It is a place accustomed to disappearance. The slope in question has no official name. It sits approximately 1.3 miles south of the pass summit on the eastern side of the highway, a relatively small avalanche path designated in Colorado Department of Transportation records only by a numerical code, RMP East 17. The starting zone is narrow, perhaps 200 feet across, and the slope angle averages 34 degrees, steep enough to slide, but not remarkable by San Juan standards. Dozens of larger, more active paths demand greater attention from highway crews. Yet RMP East 17 has exhibited a pattern that no other slope in Colorado has replicated. The first documented occurrence took place on January 15, 1972. Highway Maintenance Supervisor Franklin Delacroix was conducting a post-storm inspection following a 3-day blizzard that had deposited over 40 inches of snow across the pass. At precisely 11 o'clock in the morning, a compact avalanche released from RMP East 17 ran approximately 600 feet and deposited a debris field that partially blocked the southbound lane. Delacroix noted the time because he had just checked his watch before stepping out of his vehicle. "I remember thinking it was exactly 11, he wrote in his incident report. Then I heard the crack, like someone snapping a 2x4. The slide was cleared within 2 hours. No injuries occurred. The incident was logged as a natural release triggered by solar warming, a common phenomenon on east-facing slopes that receive direct morning sunlight. No one thought much of it until the following year. On February 23, 1973, the first clear day after a significant storm cycle, an avalanche released from RMP East 17 at 11 o'clock in the morning. Maintenance worker Dolores Quintana witnessed it from a pullout approximately 400 yards north. She reported the time as 11 sharp. I know because the radio news had just started. The 1974 release occurred on January 9th, 11 o'clock. The 1975 release occurred on March 2nd, 11 o'clock. By 1977, highway crews had begun to informally track the pattern, though no official investigation was initiated. The slides were small, the debris manageable, and the timing, while unusual, did not constitute a safety emergency. "We started calling it the 11 o'clock special," recalled Raymond Bitsilli, who worked the pass from 1976 to 1989. Guys would joke about setting their watches by it, but after a while, the joke stopped, because it just kept happening, every single year, same slope, same time. Didn't matter if it was January or March, cold or warm. First clear day after the big dump, 11 o'clock, boom. In 1981, CDOT commissioned a study of avalanche patterns along Highway 550, including an analysis of RMP East 17. The study, conducted by a consulting firm based in Denver, examined snowpack data, solar angle calculations, terrain geometry, and historical weather records. The final report, submitted in August of 1982, concluded that the 11 o'clock timing was consistent with solar warming effects on east-facing slopes at this latitude during midwinter months. The explanation satisfied administrators. It did not satisfy the crews who worked the pass. Solar warming doesn't explain why it's always the first clear day after the biggest storm, said Annette Kowalczyk, a highway engineer who reviewed the study's methodology in 1984. East-facing slopes get morning sun every clear day. Why doesn't it slide on the second clear day, or the third? And why is it always exactly 11? Not 10:45, not 11:15, 11. Kowalczyk requested funding to install timing equipment and pressure sensors on the slope. Her request was denied due to budget constraints. She submitted a revised proposal in 1986, emphasizing the research potential of studying such a predictable release pattern. That request was also denied. A handwritten note in the margin of the rejection letter, initialed but not signed, read, "Not a priority. Phenomenon is natural and poses minimal risk." The pattern continued unbroken through the 1980s. In 1988, a CDOT memo circulated among supervisory staff referenced the slope using unusual language. The memo, obtained through a public records request in 2014, described RMP East 17 as exhibiting scheduled natural phenomena and recommended that highway crews avoid the immediate area between 10:45 and 11:15 on applicable days. No definition of scheduled natural phenomena was provided. No author was listed on the memo. Raymond Bitsilli recalled receiving the memo. "I asked my supervisor what it meant. He said he didn't know. I asked who wrote it. He said it came from the regional office. I called the regional office. They said they'd never heard of it." The memo was never rescinded or replaced. Crews continued to observe an informal buffer zone around the slope during the designated window. By the early 1990s, the phenomenon had persisted for 2 decades without a single deviation, 20 consecutive winters, 20 releases. Each one timed to the minute, each one occurring on the first clear day after the season's heaviest snowfall. Then, in 1989, something changed. On February 14th of that year, a film crew from a Denver television station traveled to Red Mountain Pass to document the phenomenon for a segment on unusual Colorado landmarks. They positioned cameras above and below the slide path, synchronized their equipment to atomic clock signals, and waited. At 10:58, the crew reported hearing a low-frequency hum emanating from the slope, a sound they initially attributed to wind, but later described as more like vibration, like standing next to a power transformer. At 10:59, the sound stopped. At 11 o'clock, nothing happened. The crew waited until noon, then packed their equipment and returned to Denver. Their segment never aired. According to the producer, the footage was deemed unsuitable without explanation. The following day, February 15th, was also clear. At 11 o'clock in the morning, RMP East 17 released on schedule. No cameras were present. It was like it knew, said cameraman Vincent Aguilar, who worked on the aborted segment. I know that sounds crazy, but we were there, we were ready, and it just didn't happen. Then we leave, and the next day, right on time. He paused. I've filmed avalanches before. I've never had one stand me up. The pattern resumed without further interruption through the 2000s. The final documented release in the original sequence occurred in 1988, marking 17 consecutive years of 11 o'clock slides. After that, CDOT stopped tracking the timing in official records, citing insufficient research value. Unofficial observations, however, suggest the pattern has continued. A 2016 report from a backcountry skiing forum documented an 11 o'clock release on RMP East 17, witnessed by a group of tourers who had been warned by a local guide to avoid the area during that window. A 2019 photograph posted to social media shows fresh debris on the slope with a timestamp of 11:03, within the margin of error for most consumer cameras. No formal studies have been conducted since 1982. No sensors have been installed. The slope remains unmonitored except by the highway crews who still observe the informal buffer zone established more than 3 decades ago. Franklin Delacroix, the supervisor who witnessed the first documented release in 1972, retired in 1991. He returned to Red Mountain Pass once, in 2004, on the anniversary of that first slide. He parked at the same pullout, checked his watch, and waited. At 11 o'clock, the slope released. A small slide, perhaps 40 feet wide. It ran cleanly and stopped well above the highway. I don't know what I expected to feel, he said afterward. Vindication, maybe. Proof that I hadn't imagined it. But mostly I just felt tired. 32 years, and it was still doing the same thing, like it had an appointment it couldn't miss. He never returned to the pass again. The San Juan Mountains continue to produce avalanches every winter, hundreds of them, across dozens of paths, following patterns that forecasters can predict with reasonable accuracy. Solar warming remains the accepted explanation for morning releases on east-facing slopes. But RMP East 17 keeps its own calendar, and every year, on the first clear morning after the heaviest snow, something in the mountain decides it is time. Not at 10:45, not at 11:15, 11 o'clock, sharp. The highway crews don't set their watches by it anymore, but they still check them, just in case. And when the snow settles and the road reopens and the traffic resumes its slow crawl over the pass, no one mentions what they heard in the minutes before the slide, a sound like breathing or like counting down or like nothing at all. Some schedules are not meant to be understood, only observed. The avalanche revealed more than it buried. Wolf Creek Pass rises to 10,856 feet in the San Juan Mountains of southern Colorado, straddling the Continental Divide along Highway 160 between Pagosa Springs and South Fork. The pass receives more annual snowfall than almost any other location in Colorado, often exceeding 400 inches in a single season, earning it a reputation among meteorologists as one of the snowiest places in the American West. The highway that crosses it was completed in 1916 and has been repeatedly rebuilt, rerouted, and reinforced as the mountains continue their slow work of reclaiming what humans have carved through them. The terrain surrounding the pass is dense with spruce and fir at lower elevations, giving way to exposed alpine slopes above treeline where cornices build to enormous sizes and release with little warning. Avalanche paths crisscross the highway corridor, some reaching the roadway multiple times per winter. Highway crews maintain an extensive control program using artillery and explosive charges to trigger slides before they grow large enough to trap vehicles or claim lives. On the morning of March 11, 1994, a natural avalanche released from an unnamed slope, approximately 2 miles west of the pass summit. The slide was substantial, but not exceptional, an estimated 15,000 cubic meters of debris that crossed Highway 160 and came to rest against the opposite hillside, blocking both lanes to a depth of approximately 12 feet. The highway had been closed since the previous evening due to ongoing storm activity. No vehicles were believed to be in the affected area. When Colorado Department of Transportation crews arrived to begin clearing operations shortly after noon, they expected to find nothing beneath the snow but asphalt and forest debris. What they found instead has never been adequately explained. Equipment operator Samuel Redhorse was running a rotary snowblower along the eastern edge of the debris field when his machine struck something solid approximately 8 feet below the surface. Assuming he had hit a buried tree or rock outcropping, he signaled for hand crews to investigate. Within 20 minutes, they had uncovered the roof of a vehicle, a sedan painted a faded green with styling that crew members immediately recognized as decades out of date. I thought it was some kind of antique that had been buried in a previous slide and was just now coming up, Redhorse said in a 1995 interview. Cars get buried all the time. Sometimes they don't come out for years. But this one looked wrong. It looked too clean. As crews continued excavation, the full vehicle emerged, a 1953 Studebaker Commander, its body almost entirely free of rust or weather damage. The tires were intact. The windows were unbroken. The chrome trim along the hood reflected the afternoon sun as though it had been recently polished. Most remarkably, when a crew member touched the hood, he reported that it was warm. Foreman Patricia Engstrom ordered the excavation halted and contacted the Colorado State Patrol. Troopers arrived within the hour, accompanied by a representative from the Mineral County Sheriff's Department. The vehicle's doors were opened under official supervision. The driver's seat was empty. No occupant was found anywhere in the vehicle or the surrounding debris field. But the keys were in the ignition, and when a trooper turned them, the engine started on the first attempt. "I've been working highways for 22 years," Engstrom later wrote in an incident report that was never publicly released. "I have never seen an engine start after being buried under that much snow for any length of time. I have never seen a vehicle in that condition after any burial. I have no explanation for what we observed." The vehicle's interior yielded additional anomalies. The front passenger seat held a leather satchel containing documents, mimeographed reports, hand-drawn maps, and correspondence on official letterhead. The letterhead identified the source as the San Juan High Altitude Research Station, Mineral County, Colorado. No such facility exists in state records. No such facility has ever existed, according to the Colorado Historical Society, the United States Geological Survey, and the National Archives. The documents themselves described meteorological research conducted at an elevation of approximately 11,000 feet, focusing on atmospheric precipitation anomalies and snow crystal formation under non-standard conditions. The reports were dated between 1951 and 1954. Several pages contained handwritten annotations in the margins, including one note that read, "Results consistent with external influence, source unknown, recommend discontinuation." The correspondence included letters addressed to a Dr. Bernard Whitfield, whose signature appeared on several of the reports. Efforts to locate records of a Bernard Whitfield with credentials in meteorology or atmospheric science have been unsuccessful. The name does not appear in academic databases, professional organization archives, or census records from the relevant period. Deputy Sheriff Marta Gallegos, who assisted with the initial investigation, attempted to trace the vehicle's registration. The license plates were Colorado issued, bearing a format consistent with early 1950s manufacturing. The registration number corresponded to a vehicle reported stolen from Alamosa in October of 1953. The theft report, retrieved from archived state records, listed the owner as a James Pemberton of Alamosa, Colorado. Pemberton, according to the report, had last seen his vehicle parked outside a hardware store on the morning of October 14, 1953. He reported it missing that afternoon. James Pemberton died in 1971. His surviving family members, contacted by investigators in 1994, had no knowledge of the vehicle's recovery. His widow, Helen Pemberton, then 86 years old, expressed confusion at the inquiry. "That car was gone 40 years ago," she said. "Why are you asking about it now? Where did you find it?" When told the vehicle had been recovered from an avalanche debris field on Wolf Creek Pass, she reportedly fell silent for nearly a minute before responding. "That's not possible. James looked for that car for years. He drove Wolf Creek dozens of times. It was never there. It couldn't have been there." The Colorado State Patrol transferred the case to their cold case unit in late 1994. The vehicle was impounded and transported to a secure facility in Alamosa for further examination. Forensic analysis of the interior found no fingerprints, no biological material, and no evidence that the vehicle had ever been occupied for any significant period of time. The engine, upon mechanical inspection, showed wear patterns consistent with approximately 12,000 miles of use, roughly the mileage listed on the odometer. The fuel tank contained 5 gallons of gasoline that, according to laboratory analysis, matched formulations common in the early 1950s. The oil had not been changed recently, but showed no degradation beyond what would be expected from normal use. The vehicle appears to have been driven, parked, and then buried, wrote State Patrol forensic specialist Dennis Yamashita in his final report. The condition of the mechanical components is inconsistent with 40 years of exposure to any environment. The condition of the fuel is inconsistent with any storage scenario I am aware of. I am unable to determine how long this vehicle was beneath the snow. The research documents were forwarded to the Colorado State Archives for preservation and analysis. According to archival records, the documents were received on April 3, 1994. A notation from July of that year indicates they were transferred to federal custody at the request of an unspecified agency. The documents have not been publicly accessible since. Samuel Redhorse, the equipment operator who first struck the vehicle, requested a transfer to a different highway division later that year. He cited personal reasons and declined to discuss the incident in subsequent interviews. He retired in 2008 and moved to Arizona. Colleagues who remained in contact reported that he avoided Wolf Creek Pass for the rest of his career, sometimes driving hours out of his way to take alternate routes. "He told me once that he couldn't stop thinking about the warmth," said former co-worker David Espinoza. "The hood of that car. He said it felt like it had just been driven, like Whoever was driving it had just stepped out, but there was no one there, no footprints, nothing, just the car sitting in the snow like it had been waiting for someone to find it. The 1953 Studebaker Commander remains in state impound. Requests to examine the vehicle have been denied on the grounds that it constitutes evidence in an open investigation. The investigation, according to State Patrol records, has been classified as inactive since 1997. Wolf Creek Pass continues to receive record snowfall each winter. Avalanches cross the highway regularly, burying whatever lies beneath them until spring or until the plows arrive. No other anomalous vehicles have been recovered from the debris fields. But highway crews have learned to pay attention to what emerges when the snow is cleared. They know that the mountains hold things longer than they should, and sometimes release them at moments that seem less like accident and more like intention. The driver of the green Studebaker has never been identified. The research station has never been located. And somewhere beneath Wolf Creek Pass, in cold that should have frozen everything solid decades ago, there may be other secrets waiting for the right avalanche to set them free. The engine, they say, was still warm. After 40 years in the snow, some things, it seems, do not follow the rules of time. And some roads carry passengers that were never meant to arrive. The rescue team could see each other screaming, but no one heard a word. Ptarmigan Peak rises to 12,498 feet in the 10-mile range of central Colorado, accessible from the town of Silverthorne via a network of trails that wind through subalpine forest before emerging above tree line into exposed alpine terrain. The peak takes its name from the white-tailed ptarmigan, a small bird that inhabits the high tundra year-round, its plumage shifting from mottled brown in summer to pure white in winter, a creature so perfectly adapted to silence and camouflage that hikers often pass within feet of them without noticing. The mountain sees moderate backcountry traffic during winter months, primarily ski tourers and splitboarders seeking untracked powder in the bowls and chutes that radiate from the summit. The terrain is serious but not extreme, attracting experienced recreationists who understand avalanche safety protocols and carry appropriate rescue equipment. Fatalities are rare but not unknown. On January 19, 2003, 2 skiers departed the Ptarmigan Pass trailhead shortly after dawn. Mitchell Oduya, 31, was a mechanical engineer from Denver with 8 years of backcountry experience. His partner, Renata Sundqvist, 29, was a graduate student in environmental science at the University of Colorado and had completed Level 2 avalanche certification the previous spring. Both carried beacons, probes, and shovels. Both had checked the Colorado Avalanche Information Center forecast, which rated the danger as moderate on north-facing slopes above tree line. They were expected to return by 4 o'clock that afternoon. When they failed to appear by nightfall, Sundqvist's roommate contacted Summit County Search and Rescue. A ground team was dispatched the following morning, January 20th. Conditions were clear and cold, with temperatures hovering around -5 degrees Fahrenheit and winds calm. The team, consisting of 6 volunteers and 2 professional rescue personnel, followed the standard approach route toward Ptarmigan Peak, tracking the previous day's skin track where it remained visible beneath a thin layer of overnight snow. At approximately 11:30 in the morning, team leader Catherine Moreau observed debris consistent with a recent avalanche on a north-facing slope at approximately 12,000 feet. The debris field was compact, perhaps 150 feet wide and 300 feet in length, suggesting a relatively small but potentially deadly slide. Moreau immediately initiated beacon search protocols. Within minutes, 2 signals were detected beneath the debris. What happened next has never been satisfactorily explained. Rescue team member Jorge Feliciano was the first to enter the debris field. In his written statement, submitted 3 days later, he described the experience as follows. I was approximately 20 meters from Catherine when I crossed into the slide path. I turned to confirm my position with her. I could see her mouth moving. She was clearly speaking into her radio, but I heard nothing. Complete silence. I thought my ears had popped from the altitude, but when I spoke, I couldn't hear my own voice either. Feliciano attempted to radio his team. His transmissions were not received. He could see other team members approaching the debris field. Their movements normal, their mouths forming words. But no sound reached him. It was like someone had pressed mute on the entire world, he wrote. I could hear my heartbeat. I could hear my breathing, barely, but nothing else, nothing from outside. Moreau's account corroborates Feliciano's experience. As team members entered the debris field to conduct probe searches, radio communication ceased entirely. Hand signals became the only means of coordination. Moreau described the sensation as pressure in my ears, like being underwater, except there was no pain, just absence. The boundary of the effect was remarkably precise. Team members positioned outside the debris field could communicate normally. The moment they stepped across an invisible threshold, later estimated at approximately 200 meters in diameter, centered roughly on the middle of the slide path, all sound disappeared. Despite the communication difficulties, the team located both victims within 40 minutes. Mitchell Oduya was found at a depth of approximately 1.2 meters, in a position suggesting he had been traveling across the slope when the avalanche released. Renata Sundqvist was located 30 meters downslope, buried slightly deeper. Both were deceased. The recovery process was conducted in complete silence. Dr. Harrison Whitmore, a physician who volunteered with Summit County Search and Rescue and was present during the recovery, examined both victims at the scene before transport. His preliminary findings, documented in handwritten notes that evening, indicated no external injuries consistent with avalanche trauma. I expected to find evidence of asphyxiation, blunt force injury, or hypothermia, Whitmore wrote. Instead, I found nothing. No bruising, no edema in the airways, no signs of struggle or oxygen deprivation. Both individuals appeared to have simply stopped living. I have no medical explanation for their deaths. The Summit County Coroner's Office conducted full autopsies the following week. The official cause of death for both victims was listed as asphyxiation due to snow immersion, the standard classification for avalanche fatalities. However, the autopsy reports noted several anomalies: the absence of snow in the airways, the lack of petechial hemorrhaging typically associated with suffocation, and cardiac tissue that showed no signs of the stress response expected in traumatic death. Dr. Whitmore requested a secondary review of the findings. His request was acknowledged, but never fulfilled. The silence zone persisted. On January 21st, the day after the recovery, a team returned to the debris field to conduct additional investigation and collect personal effects. The acoustic anomaly remained in effect. Radio transmissions entering the zone were absorbed. Voices did not carry. Even mechanical sounds, the click of ski bindings, the scrape of probe poles against debris, seemed muted beyond what the snow alone could explain. Meteorologist Dr. Yolanda Fuentes, contacted by search and rescue personnel for consultation, suggested that unusual atmospheric conditions, perhaps a temperature inversion or localized pressure differential, might create sound-absorbing effects. She acknowledged, however, that such phenomena typically lasted minutes, not days, and would not produce the precise circular boundary described by rescue teams. What they're describing doesn't match any atmospheric acoustics I'm aware of, Fuentes said during a phone consultation documented in rescue team records. Temperature inversions affect sound propagation, but they don't create discrete zones of silence with hard edges. This sounds more like something absorbing the sound waves entirely. I don't know what could do that outdoors. On January 22nd, the third day after the avalanche, Search and Rescue Supervisor Daniel Kretschmer visited the site to assess conditions for potential further investigation. He entered the debris field at approximately 2 in the afternoon. The silence was gone. Kretschmer reported normal sound transmission throughout the area. Radio communication functioned without interference. His footsteps crunched audibly in the consolidated debris. Wind moving across the slope produced the expected whisper of air against snow. Whatever had suppressed sound in the zone had simply stopped. No equipment had been deployed. No intervention had occurred. The effect ended as inexplicably as it had begun. The Colorado Avalanche Information Center documented the incident as a standard backcountry avalanche fatality involving 2 victims. The report made no mention of acoustic anomalies or communication difficulties during the rescue operation. When Jorge Feliciano inquired about the omission, he was told that subjective sensory experiences were not relevant to avalanche documentation. Dr. Whitmore submitted a formal request to the Summit County Coroner's Office in March of 2003, asking for clarification on the autopsy findings and the apparent absence of trauma in both victims. He received a form letter acknowledging his inquiry. No further response was provided. Catherine Moreau continued to lead search and rescue operations in Summit County for another decade. She rarely discussed the Ptarmigan Peak incident, though colleagues noted that she carried a small notebook during subsequent missions in which she recorded ambient sound observations at regular intervals. "She never told me why," said volunteer coordinator Thomas Brandt, who worked alongside Moreau until her retirement in 2014. But every mission, she'd stop and listen and write something down. I asked her once what she was documenting. She said she was making sure she could still hear. The north-facing slope on Ptarmigan Peak has produced several avalanches since 2003. All have been natural releases, and none have resulted in fatalities. Search and rescue teams have not reported acoustic anomalies during subsequent operations in the area. Mitchell Oduya and Renata Sundqvist are buried in separate cemeteries, he in Denver, she in her hometown of Minneapolis. Their families declined to participate in interviews for this account. A memorial plaque was installed at the Ptarmigan Pass trailhead in 2004, listing their names and the date of their deaths. The plaque makes no mention of how they died. Neither does anyone else, officially. But the rescue team members who walked into that debris field remember the silence, a silence so complete it felt less like absence and more like presence, like something vast and patient had wrapped itself around that slope and held its breath. For 3 days, nothing on that mountain made a sound, and then, without explanation, the world resumed. The ptarmigans still nest on the high ridges above the tree line. They move through the snow in perfect stillness, invisible until they choose to be seen. Some silences are natural. Others feel like they're listening back. The needle always pointed toward the mountain before the mountain came down. Bear Creek Trail begins at the southern edge of Telluride, Colorado, winding through a narrow canyon carved by glacial meltwater thousands of years ago. The drainage rises steeply from the town's elevation of 8,750 feet toward the surrounding peaks of the San Juan Mountains. Passing abandoned mining structures, cascading waterfalls, and terrain that shifts from dense aspen groves to exposed alpine tundra within a few miles. In summer, the trail is a popular day hike. In winter, it becomes something else entirely, a corridor of avalanche paths so numerous that the Forest Service has identified more than a dozen distinct slide zones capable of reaching the valley floor. The town of Telluride itself sits in a box canyon surrounded on 3 sides by steep mountain walls. This geography creates both the community's spectacular scenery and its vulnerability. Avalanches have shaped the town's history since its founding during the silver boom of the 1880s, burying buildings, blocking roads, and occasionally claiming lives. Residents learned to read the snow, to watch the weather, to respect the mountains that tower above their streets. But between 1967 and 1972, something in Bear Creek drainage behaved in ways that even the most experienced locals could not explain. The first documented incident occurred on February 3, 1967. A group of 4 backcountry skiers from Montrose had entered the drainage early that morning, intending to climb toward Wasatch Peak before conditions deteriorated. The group included Howard Nakamura, a civil engineer with extensive mountaineering experience who served as navigator for the party. Nakamura carried a Silva Ranger compass, a professional-grade instrument he had used on expeditions throughout Colorado and Wyoming. Approximately 2 miles up the drainage, he noticed the compass needle behaving erratically. Rather than pointing north, the needle swung in wide arcs before settling on a bearing that pointed directly toward the eastern slope of the canyon, a steep, loaded face that the group had been carefully monitoring for signs of instability. I assumed it was a localized magnetic anomaly, Nakamura wrote in his incident report to the San Miguel County Sheriff's Department. Iron deposits in the rock can affect compass readings. I made a mental note to report it to the Geological Survey and continued navigating by terrain features. 45 minutes later, the eastern slope released. The avalanche was substantial, a slab approximately 300 feet wide that fractured at the crown and ran nearly 800 vertical feet before depositing debris across the trail. The group escaped injury only because they had paused for a water break in a protected alcove when the slide occurred. Had they maintained their pace, they would have been directly in the path. When the debris settled, Nakamura checked his compass again. The needle pointed north, steady and true, as though nothing unusual had occurred. The 1967 incident was logged as a natural avalanche triggered by wind loading and solar warming. Nakamura's observations about compass irregularities were noted but not investigated. Magnetic anomalies, while uncommon, were not unheard of in mineralized terrain. The following February, it happened again. On February 19, 1968, 2 local ski patrollers conducting a reconnaissance of the Bear Creek drainage reported compass malfunctions beginning approximately 1 mile from the trailhead. Patroller Rosa Delgado described her compass needle as spinning like it couldn't make up its mind, then just stopping and pointing at the south wall. Her partner, William Henriksen, observed identical behavior with his own instrument. Both patrollers were experienced enough to recognize unusual conditions. They aborted their reconnaissance and returned to town to report the anomaly. At 2:15 that afternoon, a Class 3 avalanche released from the south wall of the drainage, the precise direction both compasses had indicated. The slide buried a section of trail the patrollers would have been traversing had they continued their route. "I've been working these mountains for 11 years, Henriksen stated in his written report. "I've seen compasses act strange near old mine workings. This was different. It felt like the compass was trying to tell us something, like it knew where the slide was going to happen before it did." The United States Forest Service, which administers the land surrounding Telluride, requested a geological assessment of the Bear Creek drainage following the 1968 incident. The assessment, conducted by a team from the Colorado School of Mines in the summer of 1969, found no unusual mineral concentrations capable of producing significant magnetic interference. Iron content in the exposed rock was within normal parameters. No buried ore bodies or abandoned mine infrastructure that might affect compass readings were identified along the trail corridor. "The magnetic survey results are unremarkable," the assessment concluded. "We found no geological explanation for the compass anomalies reported during winter months. It is possible that the reports represent observer error, equipment malfunction, or transient atmospheric effects unrelated to local geology." The researchers recommended continued monitoring. No formal monitoring program was established. Between 1969 and 1971, 3 additional incidents occurred, each following the same pattern. compass needles in the drainage became erratic, oriented toward a specific slope, and within hours, that slope released an avalanche. On January 12, 1970, a solo backcountry traveler named Marcus Pendleton reported his compass pointing persistently toward a northeast-facing chute. He photographed the compass reading before retreating from the drainage. The chute released at approximately 4 o'clock that afternoon. Pendleton submitted his photographs to the Forest Service along with a detailed written account. The photographs have since been lost. On February 28, 1971, a search and rescue training exercise was interrupted when all 4 participants experienced simultaneous compass failure. Team leader Constance Yamamoto described the needles as oscillating rapidly, then locking onto the same bearing, all 4 of them pointing at the same spot on the ridge. The team evacuated immediately. The ridge produced a significant avalanche the following morning. On March 5, 1972, the final incident in the documented sequence occurred. 2 cross-country skiers from Denver entered the drainage despite posted warnings about avalanche conditions. Neither carried avalanche rescue equipment. Both carried compasses. According to the single survivor, Jeffrey Bartholomew, their compasses began behaving erratically approximately 90 minutes into their tour. Bartholomew wanted to turn back. His partner, Alan Strickland, insisted they continue, dismissing the compass readings as meaningless. He said compasses don't predict avalanches, Bartholomew stated in his interview with San Miguel County Search and Rescue. He said I was being superstitious. I couldn't explain why I was so sure we needed to leave. I just knew. Bartholomew stopped to adjust his binding approximately 200 yards behind Strickland. He was still crouched in the snow when the slope above his partner released. Strickland's body was recovered 3 days later. His compass was found clutched in his right hand, the needle frozen in position, pointing directly at the crown fracture of the avalanche that had killed him. The recovery team noted that Bartholomew's compass, which he had been carrying in his jacket pocket throughout the search, began functioning normally the moment Strickland's body was located. Before that moment, it had pointed consistently toward the burial site. "I don't know how to explain it," said rescue team member Angela Whitfield. "We used his compass to help narrow the search. It kept pointing at the same spot. We thought it was broken. Turns out it was the most accurate instrument we had." Following the 1972 fatality, the Forest Service implemented an unusual policy. Beginning in February of 1973, Bear Creek Trail was closed to public access from February 1st through February 28th each year. The closure notice cited elevated avalanche hazard and unstable snowpack conditions. Internal Forest Service memoranda, obtained through a Freedom of Information Act request in 2009, reveal additional context. A memo dated January 19, 1973, from the San Juan National Forest Supervisor to district rangers references anomalous magnetic activity correlated with slope failure and recommends precautionary closure during the period of highest observed correlation. No scientific explanation for the correlation was provided. No research was commissioned to investigate it. The February closure policy remained in effect until 1986, when it was quietly discontinued. Forest Service officials at the time attributed the change to updated avalanche forecasting capabilities that made blanket closures unnecessary. Howard Nakamura, the engineer who reported the first incident in 1967, returned to Bear Creek drainage in February of 1988. The first February he could legally access the trail in over 15 years. He carried the same Silva Ranger compass he had used 2 decades earlier. "I wanted to see if it would happen again," he said in a 2004 interview conducted for an oral history project on Colorado avalanche incidents. "I spent 3 days in that drainage, perfect conditions, stable snowpack. My compass worked fine the entire time, not a single wobble." He paused before continuing. "Part of me was relieved. Part of me was disappointed, and part of me wondered if whatever had been there had simply moved on, or if it was just waiting for something else. The Bear Creek drainage continues to produce avalanches each winter, documented by the Colorado Avalanche Information Center as part of standard forecasting operations. No unusual magnetic phenomena have been officially reported since 1972. Compasses, of course, have largely been replaced by GPS devices that rely on satellites rather than magnetic fields. Few backcountry travelers today carry traditional compasses as their primary navigation tool. Those who do sometimes report that the devices behave strangely in certain drainages, needles drifting, readings inconsistent, bearings that point somewhere other than north. They usually assume their instruments are faulty. They rarely consider the alternative. And on clear February mornings, when the snow lies heavy on the slopes above Telluride and the mountains hold their breath before releasing, no one watches the compass needles anymore. Perhaps it's better that way. Some warnings are easier to ignore when you can't see them pointing at your destination. Snow does not flow uphill, except, apparently, when it does. Aspen Highlands rises to the southwest of Aspen, Colorado, its summit reaching 11,675 feet at the top of the Loge Peak lift. Among the four mountains that comprise Aspen Skiing Company's terrain, Highlands has always been the outlier, steeper, more challenging, and historically favored by locals over the tourists who flock to Aspen Mountain's more accessible slopes. The Highland Bowl, accessible only by a grueling hike from the top of the lift system, offers some of the most extreme inbound skiing in North America, with pitches exceeding 45 degrees and exposure that demands respect even from expert skiers. The Ski Patrol at Aspen Highlands has long maintained a reputation for technical excellence. Controlling avalanches on terrain this steep requires precision, experience, and an intimate understanding of how snow behaves under stress. Patrollers use a combination of hand charges, artillery, and increasingly sophisticated explosive delivery systems to trigger slides before they can threaten guests or infrastructure. The work is dangerous, methodical, and almost always predictable. Almost always. On the morning of February 7, 2001, a patrol team began control work on a slope designated internally as HP-12, a north-facing chute below the Highland Bowl access ridge that had accumulated significant wind-loaded snow over the previous 72 hours. The slope was not part of the publicly accessible terrain, but sat above a traverse used by patrol for access to other control routes. Standard protocol called for its release before patrol could safely move through the area. The team that morning consisted of 4 members: lead patroller Garrett Johansson, senior patroller Diana Montoya, patroller Kevin Tremblay, and patrol trainee Yuki Hashimoto. Johansson had 19 years of experience at Highlands. Montoya had 12. Both had conducted control work on HP-12 dozens of times without incident. At 7:42 in the morning, Johansson deployed a hand charge from a position above the starting zone. The explosion was clean, the placement textbook. The slab fractured predictably at the crown and began its descent. First 400 meters, it was perfect, Johansson stated in his incident report. Classic propagation, good run-out trajectory. I was already thinking about the next charge. Then the debris stopped. Video footage captured by a helmet-mounted camera worn by Tremblay shows the avalanche decelerating rapidly at approximately 410 meters from the crown fracture. Within 3 seconds, the debris field came to a complete halt on a slope that still exceeded 30 degrees, an angle at which snow in motion should not stop under any normal circumstances. What happened next has been the subject of dispute, denial, and quiet speculation for over 2 decades. According to Johansson's written statement, submitted that afternoon to Aspen Skiing Company management, the debris remained stationary for approximately 5 to 7 seconds. then appeared to shift position in an uphill direction before settling permanently. Montoya's statement was more direct. The snow moved backward. I know that sounds impossible. I watched it happen. It moved maybe 15-20 meters back up the slope. Then it stopped like nothing had happened. Tremblay's statement, the shortest of the four, read in its entirety. I saw what the others saw. I don't know how to explain it. I'd rather not speculate. Hashimoto, the trainee, submitted a statement indicating that her view had been partially obstructed and she could not confirm or deny the observations of her colleagues. However, interview notes from a meeting with patrol management 3 days later quote her as saying, "I saw enough to know I don't want to see it again." The helmet camera footage became the focus of immediate attention. Tremblay's camera had captured the entire event from a vantage point approximately 200 meters from the slide path. Patrol management reviewed the footage that afternoon in a closed session. No official description of the footage's contents has ever been released. Within 48 hours, the footage was requisitioned by Aspen Skiing Company's insurance carrier, Mountain States Liability Consortium, under provisions of the resort's coverage agreement that allowed for the collection of documentation related to anomalous operational incidents. The requisition was accompanied by a non-disclosure agreement that all 4 patrol members were required to sign as a condition of continued employment. I asked why the insurance company needed our video, Johansson said, in a 2019 interview conducted under condition of anonymity for a documentary project that was never completed. They said it was standard procedure for unusual events. I asked what was unusual about an avalanche stopping. They didn't answer. The slope designated HP-12 was not opened for controlled release for the remainder of the 2001 season. Internal communications obtained through a former Aspen Skiing Company employee indicate that patrol management recommended indefinite suspension of control operations on the slope pending further analysis of terrain characteristics. The further analysis, if it occurred, has never been documented in any publicly available record. Geotechnical consultants were reportedly contacted in March of 2001 to assess the slope's subsurface composition. According to second-hand accounts from patrol members who observed the assessment team, the consultants spent 2 days conducting ground-penetrating radar surveys and collecting soil samples from the runout zone. No report from this assessment has been located in Aspen Skiing Company records, Pitkin County permit archives, or Colorado Geological Survey databases. Requests submitted under the Colorado Open Records Act have been declined on the grounds that no responsive documents exist. Diana Montoya left Aspen Highlands at the end of the 2001 season, transferring to a patrol position at a smaller resort in New Mexico. She declined interview requests for over a decade before agreeing to speak briefly with a researcher in 2014. "I've been doing this work my whole adult life," she said. "I've seen snow do a lot of things. I've seen slabs hang up on terrain features. I've seen debris stop on low-angle slopes when it shouldn't. But I've never seen snow move uphill. Not before that day, not since." She paused. "The thing that stays with me isn't what I saw, it's what I felt. When that debris started moving backward, I felt, I don't know how to describe it, like the mountain was correcting a mistake, like the snow wasn't supposed to fall, and something put it back." Kevin Tremblay remained at Aspen Highlands until 2008. He never discussed the incident publicly and reportedly refused to participate in internal debriefs beyond his initial written statement. Colleagues described him as a meticulous patroller who became noticeably more cautious in his approach to control work following the 2001 season. "He started double-checking everything," said a former colleague who requested anonymity. "Charges, placements, escape routes. He was always careful before, but after that February, it was different, like he was expecting something to go wrong in a way he couldn't predict." Garrett Johansson retired from patrol work in 2012 after 30 years at Aspen Highlands. In his retirement interview with the Aspen Daily News, he made no mention of the 2001 incident. When asked about the most memorable moment of his career, he cited a successful rescue of a buried skier in 1994. The slope HP-12 remains closed to controlled release operations. According to current Aspen Highlands Patrol protocols, the slope is classified as natural release only, meaning patrol does not conduct active control work, and the slope is allowed to avalanche on its own schedule. This classification is unusual for terrain within the resort's operational boundary, particularly terrain that sits above access routes used by patrol. The helmet camera footage has never been returned to Aspen Skiing Company. Mountain States Liability Consortium merged with a larger insurance group in 2009. Requests for the footage submitted to the successor organization have been met with responses indicating that no records matching the description exist in their archives. 3 people saw snow move uphill on a February morning in 2001. They signed documents agreeing not to discuss what they witnessed. The evidence was collected by an entity with no scientific interest in understanding it, and a slope that had been routinely controlled for decades was quietly removed from the rotation, left to release when it chooses, monitored, but no longer touched. The official explanation, when one is offered at all, references terrain management optimization and resource allocation priorities. No one mentions the video. No one mentions the 7 seconds when the debris sat motionless on a 30-degree slope. No one mentions the 15 meters of snow that traveled in the wrong direction. Because snow does not flow uphill, and some things are easier to file away than to explain. The mountain returned what it had already given back. Independence Pass crosses the Continental Divide at 12,095 feet, connecting the Roaring Fork Valley near Aspen to the Arkansas River drainage above Leadville. The road that traverses it, Highway 82, is the highest paved crossing in Colorado, open only during summer months when snowmelt reveals the narrow ribbon of asphalt carved into terrain so steep and exposed that winter closure is not a choice but a necessity. From November through May, the pass belongs to the snow, the wind, and whatever else moves through the high country when no one is watching. The surrounding peaks of the Sawatch Range rise to over 14,000 feet, their flanks scarred by avalanche paths that have been running since long before humans arrived to name them. Independence Pass itself was named for the mining camp established nearby on July 4, 1879, a settlement that thrived briefly on silver before the ore played out and the miners moved on, leaving behind collapsed cabins and rusting equipment that the forest has slowly reclaimed. The mountains here have a long memory for what gets left behind. On March 15, 1962, a 5-person geological survey team from the United States Geological Survey entered the Upper Independence Pass drainage to conduct mapping work related to a proposed highway improvement project. The team was led by Dr. Franklin Ashworth, a senior geologist with 18 years of federal service. His team included cartographer Bernard Olson, field technicians Maureen Kinsella and David Yazzie, and graduate research assistant Thomas Lindqvist, who was completing his doctoral work at the Colorado School of Mines. The weather that morning was clear but cold, with temperatures hovering near zero and moderate winds from the southwest. The team departed their base camp at approximately 7:30, carrying survey equipment, camping supplies, and scientific instruments valued at several $1,000s, a significant investment in 1962 government budgets. They were expected to return by nightfall. When they failed to appear, a search was initiated the following morning. Searchers located the debris field of a substantial avalanche approximately 2 miles above the pass summit on a northeast-facing slope that had released sometime during the afternoon of March 15th. The slide had run over 1,000 vertical feet, depositing debris across the team's projected route. Probe lines were established immediately. 4 bodies were recovered over the following 3 days: Ashworth, Olson, Kinsella, and Yazzie. All showed injuries consistent with avalanche burial. Thomas Lindqvist was never found despite extensive searching that continued intermittently through the spring thaw. The USGS documented the incident as an occupational fatality and conducted a thorough inventory of recovered equipment. Survey instruments, personal effects, and scientific materials were cataloged, photographed, and transported to a federal storage facility in Denver for processing. The inventory log, preserved in National Archives records, lists 47 individual items recovered from the debris field, each assigned a unique serial number and storage location. The case was closed in August of 1962. The storage facility where the recovered equipment was housed, a warehouse on the western edge of Denver's industrial district, continued to hold USGS materials until 1984, when an electrical fire destroyed the building and its contents. Insurance claims documented the loss of thousands of items, including the materials from the 1962 Independence Pass recovery. 40 years passed. On March 15, 2002, the exact anniversary of the original avalanche, a natural release occurred on the same slope above Independence Pass. The slide was smaller than its predecessor, running approximately 600 vertical feet before depositing debris across a popular backcountry skiing zone. No one was caught in the avalanche. No injuries occurred. 3 days later, a group of ski tourers traversing the debris field discovered something partially exposed at the surface, a metal case, approximately 2 feet long and 1 foot wide, bearing a faded government seal. The skiers, assuming they had found historical mining equipment, photographed the case and reported it to the Forest Service. A ranger retrieved the item the following week. Inside the case was a theodolite, a precision surveying instrument used for measuring angles in the horizontal and vertical planes. The instrument was in remarkable condition, showing minimal corrosion despite decades of presumed burial. A brass plate attached to the case bore a serial number, USGS-1961-44472. That serial number matched an item listed in the 1962 recovery inventory as theodolite, Teufel and Esser model, recovered from debris field, condition damaged but repairable. The same theodolite that had been logged as recovered, transported to Denver, stored in a warehouse, and destroyed in a fire 18 years earlier. I checked the records 3 times, said National Archives research specialist Deborah Whitaker, who assisted with the verification process. The serial numbers are identical. The item descriptions match. According to every document we have, this instrument was removed from the mountain in 1962 and destroyed in 1984. There's no ambiguity, there's no clerical error that could explain it. The theodolite was transferred to USGS custody for further examination. Forensic analysis confirmed the instrument's age and origin. Manufactured by Teufel and Esser in 1958, purchased by the USGS in 1959, assigned to the Western Region Survey Pool in 1960. The brass serial plate showed no evidence of tampering or replacement. More troubling were the condition findings. The instrument displayed wear patterns consistent with extended field use, including calibration marks and handling scratches that matched descriptions in the original inventory documentation. But it also showed no evidence of the fire damage that should have been present if the instrument had been in the Denver warehouse in 1984. The varnish on the wooden components was intact, wrote forensic examiner Paul Gustafson in his analysis report. There was no heat discoloration, no smoke residue, no warping of the brass fittings. This instrument was never in a fire. The question is where it was instead. Additional items emerged from the debris field over the following weeks as spring warming exposed more of the slide path. A leather field notebook, waterlogged but legible, bearing Maureen Kinsella's name. a canvas equipment bag containing surveying stakes stamped with USGS markings, a pocket compass in a brass case, its needle still functional. Each item appeared in the 1962 recovery inventory. Each item had been logged as transported to Denver. Each item should have been destroyed in the 1984 fire. The field notebook attracted particular attention. Kinsella's entries documented routine survey work through March 14, 1962, with measurements, observations, and weather notes. The final entry, dated March 15th, was more unusual. Visibility decreasing. FA wants to push for the upper basin. Wind shifting. I don't like the look of the northeast slope. Suggested we turn back. Overruled. Something feels wrong today. The snow sounds different. The entry ends there. No indication of what happened next. No mention of the avalanche that killed her hours later. Dr. Franklin Ashworth's descendants were contacted regarding the recovered materials. His granddaughter, Ellen Ashworth Brennan, traveled to Colorado in May of 2002 to view the items. My grandmother kept everything related to my grandfather's death, she said. Photographs, letters, the official report. She had a copy of the inventory list. She always wondered about the equipment, whether any of it was worth saving, whether any of it mattered. She died believing it had all been recovered and properly archived. She died believing the mountain had given everything back. She paused, examining the theodolite through a glass display case. So what do I tell her now? That it wasn't recovered? That the records were wrong? Or that the mountain took it back and kept it for 40 years and then gave it back again on the same day in the same place, like some kind of... She didn't finish the sentence. The USGS conducted an internal review of the 1962 documentation and the 1984 fire records. The review concluded that discrepancies exist between physical evidence and archival documentation, but offered no explanation for how equipment logged as destroyed could reappear 4 decades later in its original burial location. A supplementary investigation attempted to locate the original recovery team members who had retrieved materials from the debris field in 1962. All 5 individuals were deceased. Their field notes, if any had been preserved, were not found. Thomas Lindqvist, the graduate student whose body was never recovered, remains officially listed as deceased, presumed buried. His remains have never been located despite the 2002 slide's disturbance of the debris field. His family stopped requesting searches in 1978. The recovered equipment is currently housed at the USGS Denver Federal Center, classified as Historical Materials of Undetermined Provenance. Requests to examine the items for research purposes have been approved on a limited basis, though researchers report that certain documentation related to the recovery has been reclassified and is no longer accessible. Independence Pass closes each year with the first significant snowfall, typically in late October or early November. The northeast slope that released in both 1962 and 2002 continues to avalanche regularly, monitored by the Colorado Avalanche Information Center, but beyond any practical control measures. The debris from each season's slide settles, compacts, and eventually melts. Whatever lies beneath moves slowly downslope, sometimes surfacing, sometimes sinking deeper into the snowpack's memory. 40 years between releases, the same date, the same equipment, returned to the same place it had supposedly been removed from. The official explanation is that the 1962 recovery inventory was erroneous, that the items were never actually retrieved, that the documentation was falsified or mistaken, that bureaucratic error preserved on paper what the mountain had actually kept. But the signatures on the inventory forms were verified. The transport manifests were authenticated. The warehouse logs showed the materials arriving in Denver. Someone recovered that equipment in 1962. Someone saw it destroyed in 1984. And in 2002, the mountain gave it back anyway. Some returns cannot be explained by error. Some debts are paid on schedules that only the creditor understands. And somewhere beneath Independence Pass, in snow that falls fresh each winter and melts each spring without ever quite letting go of what it holds, Thomas Lindqvist is still waiting for his 40-year return. If the pattern holds, the next release should come in 2042, March 15th. The same slope, the same silence before the fracture, and perhaps finally, the last thing the mountain borrowed in 1962. The crack in the snow was too perfect to be an accident. Cameron Pass sits at 10,276 feet along Highway 14, connecting Fort Collins to Walden through the Medicine Bow Mountains of northern Colorado. The pass is less traveled than its counterparts to the south, less developed, less monitored, and less forgiving when winter storms sweep across the exposed terrain. The highway closes frequently during heavy snow events, and the surrounding slopes produce avalanches with little warning, their debris fields often reaching the roadway before maintenance crews can respond. The region has a long human history that predates European settlement by thousands of years. The Arapaho, Cheyenne, and Ute peoples traveled through these mountains along seasonal routes, though they rarely established permanent camps at the highest elevations. Oral traditions passed down through generations speak of certain places that were avoided, not because of physical danger alone, but because the land itself communicated that visitors were unwelcome. Cameron Pass, according to some accounts, was one such place. The avalanche occurred on the morning of February 23, 1987, on a southeast-facing slope approximately 1.5 miles east of the pass summit. The slide was triggered naturally, releasing sometime between 3 and 4 in the morning, based on debris consolidation analysis conducted later that day. No vehicles were on the highway at the time. No injuries occurred. By the standards of Colorado avalanche incidents, it was unremarkable. What made it remarkable came later. Colorado Department of Transportation protocol following significant avalanches includes aerial documentation of the slide path, crown fracture, and debris field. These photographs assist with forecasting, route planning, and infrastructure assessment. On February 24th, a CDOT helicopter conducted a standard overflight of the Cameron Pass avalanche, capturing 37 photographs from various angles and elevations. Photograph 17, taken from approximately 800 feet above the starting zone, showed the crown fracture in its entirety. The pilot, Sandra Littlecrow, was the first to notice the anomaly. In her flight log submitted that afternoon, she noted, "Crown fracture displays unusual geometry, appears symmetrical, possibly optical illusion from altitude. Recommend ground verification." Ground verification was conducted on February 26th by a two-person CDOT assessment team. Their report confirmed what the aerial photograph suggested. The fracture line was not the irregular, jagged break typically produced by slab avalanche release. Instead, it formed a distinct pattern, a series of connected angular shapes that repeated across the approximately 400-foot width of the starting zone. The fracture geometry is inconsistent with known failure mechanics, wrote highway engineer Victor Stanhope in the assessment. Natural crown fractures follow weaknesses in the snowpack and irregularities in the bed surface. This fracture appears to follow a predetermined path with no correlation to observable terrain features or snowpack structure. Stanhope included detailed measurements in his report. The repeating pattern consisted of triangular forms connected at their bases, with consistent angles of approximately 60 degrees at each vertex. The spacing between pattern elements varied by less than 4 inches across the entire fracture line. "I've been analyzing avalanche crown fractures for 14 years, Stanhope stated in a later interview. "I've never seen geometry like this. Snow doesn't break in repeating patterns. It breaks along lines of weakness. This looked designed." The photographs were circulated within CDOT's Avalanche program and eventually reached researchers at Colorado State University who were conducting ongoing studies of fracture propagation in alpine snowpacks. Dr. Helena Vasquez, the lead researcher, requested access to the original negatives for detailed analysis. Her preliminary findings, documented in correspondence with CDOT dated April 1987, were cautious but intrigued. The pattern regularity exceeds what our models predict for any natural fracture scenario. We have considered the possibility of human intervention, explosive charges placed in a deliberate pattern, but the fracture characteristics are inconsistent with blast effects. We have no explanation for how this geometry was produced. The correspondence continued for several months, with increasingly technical discussions of fracture mechanics, crystal structure, and propagation dynamics. No satisfactory explanation emerged. In September of 1987, Dr. Vasquez made an unusual request. She asked CDOT for permission to share the photographs with consultants outside the engineering and scientific community, specifically with cultural advisors from the northern Arapaho tribe in Wyoming, whose ancestral territory had included the Cameron Pass region. The request was approved, though internal memos suggest some administrators were skeptical of its relevance. 3 weeks later, Dr. Vasquez received a response from James Whitehawk, a tribal historian and cultural preservation officer who had reviewed the photographs at her request. His letter, preserved in university archives, described his reaction to the images. "The pattern in your photographs is immediately recognizable to me, though I did not expect to see it in this context. It is a symbol that appears in traditional Arapaho marking systems, used to identify places that are spiritually restricted, what you might translate as places that reject habitation. These are locations where the land itself has made clear that humans should not remain. The symbol was placed at boundaries, on rocks or trees, to warn travelers not to camp or settle." Whitehawk continued, "I cannot explain how this symbol came to appear in a snow fracture. I can only tell you what it means. The land is communicating something. Whether you believe that communication is natural or supernatural is, I think, beside the point. The message is the same either way. This place does not want you here." Dr. Vasquez shared Whitehawk's analysis with CDOT officials who received it with polite but evident discomfort. The final incident report, submitted in December of 1987, made no mention of the tribal consultation. It described the crown fracture geometry as anomalous, but ultimately consistent with natural variation in snowpack failure patterns. The phrase "natural variation" appeared 3 times in the report's conclusions. No supporting data was provided to explain how natural variation could produce symmetrical, repeating geometric forms. Victor Stanhope, the engineer who had conducted the ground assessment, filed a dissenting addendum to the report. His addendum, included in the archived file but not in the publicly distributed version, stated, "I cannot sign off on conclusions that describe this fracture as natural. The geometry is too precise, too consistent, and too clearly patterned to result from any failure mechanism I am aware of. I am not suggesting a cause. I am stating that the official explanation is insufficient." Stanhope retired from CDOT in 1992. In a 2008 interview conducted for a regional history project, he reflected on the Cameron Pass incident with evident frustration. "They wanted it to be natural because natural doesn't require further investigation. Natural means it's over, it's done, we can move on. But I walked that fracture line. I measured it with my own hands. Snow doesn't know geometry. Snow doesn't know how to make triangles. Something else made that pattern, and we decided not to ask what." James Whitehawk passed away in 2003. Before his death, he spoke about the Cameron Pass photographs in an oral history recorded by the Northern Arapaho Tribal Historic Preservation Office. "The old people knew things about the land that we've forgotten how to listen to," he said. "They knew that some places push back. They knew that the earth has its own language, and sometimes it speaks whether we're ready to hear it or not. That symbol in the snow, it wasn't put there by human hands. But it was still a message. The same message our ancestors understood. Stay away. Don't build here. Don't stay here. This place belongs to something else." The slope that produced the 1987 avalanche continues to release periodically. Aerial photographs from subsequent events show normal fracture patterns, irregular, jagged, following the unpredictable logic of snow under stress. No repeating geometric patterns have been documented since. Highway 14 remains open during winter months when conditions permit, though it closes frequently during storms. Cameron Pass itself hosts no permanent structures, no visitor centers, no rest areas, no development of any kind. Proposals to build facilities near the pass summit have been rejected repeatedly over the decades, most recently in 2016, citing environmental concerns and infrastructure costs. The 1987 photographs remain in CDOT archives, filed under incident documentation for that winter season. They are not classified or restricted. Anyone with a valid research request can view them. Few people do. And those who have seen photograph 17, the wide shot of the crown fracture, the repeating triangles marching across the white expanse like a warning written in a language older than English, tend not to talk about it afterward. Some messages don't require translation. They only require recognition. And on Cameron Pass, where the wind never quite stops and the snow falls heavier than anywhere else along the northern Front Range, the land spoke once in a voice that left a mark. Whether it will speak again is not a question anyone seems eager to answer. They were not frozen. That was the part no one could explain. Monarch Mountain rises along the Continental Divide in central Colorado, its summit reaching 11,952 feet above the small ski area that bears its name. The resort sits near Monarch Pass on Highway 50, between Salida and Gunnison, a stretch of road that climbs through narrow canyons and exposed ridgelines where winter storms arrive with little warning and avalanche paths crisscross the terrain in every direction. Monarch is a locals' mountain, modest in size, but respected for its snowfall and its unforgiving backcountry. The slopes beyond the ski area boundary attract experienced tourers seeking solitude and untracked powder. The terrain is serious, steep chutes, wind-loaded bowls, and runout zones that funnel into creek drainages where debris can pile to depths that make recovery difficult. Avalanche fatalities in the Monarch backcountry are rare but not unknown. Between 1995 and 2008, 3 such fatalities occurred in the drainages surrounding Monarch Mountain. Each was documented as a standard avalanche burial. Each case was closed without controversy, and each victim shared a physiological anomaly that has never been publicly addressed. The first was Russell Trujillo, a 37-year-old carpenter from Poncha Springs who was caught in a slide on January 19, 1995. Trujillo was ski touring alone in a drainage northeast of the ski area when an avalanche released above him. His car was found at the trailhead that evening. Search and rescue teams located his beacon signal the following morning. Trujillo had been buried for approximately 18 hours when recovery teams reached him. The burial depth was 1.4 meters. Air temperature at the surface during the burial period had ranged from -12 to -18 degrees Fahrenheit. Under these conditions, a buried victim would be expected to reach core body temperature equilibrium with the surrounding snow, approximately 32 degrees Fahrenheit, within 6 to 8 hours. Trujillo's core temperature at recovery was measured at 89.2 degrees Fahrenheit. The paramedic who recorded the reading, Consuelo Archuleta, initially assumed her thermometer was malfunctioning. She took a second reading with a backup instrument, 89.4 degrees. "I've worked avalanche recoveries for 9 years, Archuleta stated in her incident report. I've never recorded a core temperature above ambient in a victim buried longer than 2 hours. This man had been under the snow for 18 hours. His body should have been cold. He wasn't." Trujillo was pronounced dead at the scene despite the elevated temperature. The cause of death, according to the Chaffee County coroner, was asphyxiation due to snow immersion. The temperature anomaly was noted in the autopsy report, but not investigated further. The second case occurred on February 7, 2002. Elena Bridwell, 29, a wildlife biologist conducting winter fieldwork in the Monarch Pass area, was buried by an avalanche while crossing a slope she had traveled safely numerous times before. Her research partner witnessed the slide and initiated rescue procedures immediately, but was unable to locate her beacon signal for nearly 3 hours due to equipment interference from nearby power lines. Bridwell's burial time was estimated at 3 hours and 40 minutes. Her burial depth was 90 centimeters. Surface temperatures during the burial period averaged -8 degrees Fahrenheit. Her core body temperature at recovery was 91.6 degrees. The recovery team leader, Nathan Sorrell, documented the reading in his field notes with a single annotation. "Temp reading makes no sense. Instrument verified functional. No explanation." Bridwell was also pronounced dead at the scene. Her autopsy, conducted by the same coroner who had examined Trujillo 7 years earlier, noted the temperature anomaly and added an observation that had not appeared in the earlier report. Tissue examination reveals no evidence of hypoxic stress, cold-related injury, or trauma consistent with avalanche burial. Cause of death undetermined. Manner of death presumed accidental. The coroner, Dr. Martin Sedgwick, contacted the Colorado Avalanche Information Center following Bridwell's autopsy to inquire whether similar temperature anomalies had been documented in other cases. CAIC records contained no comparable incidents in their database. "I asked if they had ever seen anything like this," Sedgwick said in a 2016 interview conducted for a medical journal article that was ultimately rejected for publication. "They said no. I asked who else I should contact. They didn't have an answer, so I filed my report and moved on. What else could I do?" The third case added a dimension that complicated any simple physiological explanation. On March 3, 2008, a solo backcountry skier named Darnell Washington was caught in an avalanche approximately 2 miles west of Monarch Pass. Washington, 41, was an experienced mountaineer with over 15 years of backcountry travel in Colorado. He had checked conditions that morning, confirmed moderate avalanche danger, and chosen a route that avoided the most obvious hazard zones. The slope that buried him was rated as low-angle terrain, unlikely to produce significant avalanches. It released anyway. Washington's emergency beacon activated automatically upon burial, transmitting coordinates to search and rescue dispatch. A team reached the debris field within 90 minutes. Probe lines located Washington at a depth of 1.1 meters after approximately 40 minutes of searching. Total burial time, 2 hours and 26 minutes. Core body temperature at recovery, 94.8 degrees, nearly normal for a living human. But Washington was not alive. The recovery team, uncertain how to proceed, transported the body to the Chaffee County Hospital Emergency Department rather than the coroner's facility. Emergency physicians conducted a full assessment, including cardiac monitoring, neurological evaluation, and repeated temperature measurements. "I've treated hypothermia cases where patients appeared clinically dead and later recovered," said emergency physician Dr. Yolanda Fitzgerald, who examined Washington that afternoon. "We follow protocols for extended resuscitation because cold bodies can sometimes be revived, but this man wasn't cold. His temperature was 94 degrees. He should have been alive. All the thermal indicators suggested a living patient. but there was no cardiac activity, no respiratory function, no neurological response. He was dead, but his body didn't know it. Washington's autopsy was conducted by Dr. Sedgwick, who by then had examined all 3 Monarch victims. His report noted the temperature anomaly and added findings that aligned with the Bridwell case. No evidence of asphyxiation, no cold injury, no trauma consistent with avalanche forces. The report also included a new observation. Histological examination of brain tissue reveals patterns consistent with prolonged delta wave sleep state. Cellular markers suggest the subject was in a state of deep unconsciousness at the time of death. This finding is inconsistent with the stress response expected in avalanche burial, where victims typically display evidence of panic, struggle, or oxygen deprivation. In simpler terms, Darnell Washington had fallen asleep beneath the snow and never woke up. His body remained warm. His brain showed no signs of distress. He simply stopped living peacefully in a place where peaceful death should not be possible. Dr. Sedgwick attempted to publish his findings in 2010, submitting a case series to 3 separate medical journals. All 3 rejected the paper on methodological grounds, citing insufficient sample size and lack of controlled comparison data. One reviewer's comments, shared with Sedgwick, noted, "The temperature findings described are physiologically implausible and suggest instrumentation error rather than genuine anomaly." Sedgwick retired in 2014. Before his retirement, he compiled his notes on the 3 Monarch cases into an informal report that he shared with the Chaffee County Search and Rescue Archives. "Something in that terrain produces heat," he wrote in the report's conclusion, "or something preserves it, or something generates warmth in the human body even as life ceases. I don't know which explanation is correct. I don't know if any of them are possible. I only know what I measured, what I examined, and what I could not explain." The slopes surrounding Monarch Mountain continue to avalanche each winter. Search and rescue teams continue to respond to burials, recoveries, and occasional rescues. Standard protocols are followed, standard measurements are taken. No additional temperature anomalies have been officially reported since 2008. But rescue workers who operate in the Monarch backcountry sometimes speak quietly among themselves about the warm burials, the 3 cases that don't fit the textbooks, the bodies that refuse to cool, the peaceful expressions on faces that should have shown terror. Some have theories, geothermal vents, undiscovered hot springs, some quirk of the mountain's geology that produces warmth in unexpected places. Others prefer not to theorize at all. "I just do my job," said one veteran rescue team member who requested anonymity. "I find people when I can. I bring them home. I don't ask why the mountain does what it does, because sometimes the answers are worse than not knowing." Russell Trujillo, Elena Bridwell, and Darnell Washington are buried in 3 different cemeteries across Colorado. Their families received official explanations: avalanche burial, asphyxiation, accidental death. The explanations were accepted. The cases were closed. But somewhere in the files of the Chaffee County Coroner's Office, 3 autopsy reports contain measurements that defy the basic physics of thermodynamics, temperatures that should have been impossible, in bodies that should have been frozen beneath snow that should have stolen every trace of warmth. The snow did not steal their warmth. Something gave it back. And in the quiet drainages above Monarch Pass, where the wind sounds almost like breathing and the snow settles soft as a blanket, the mountain keeps its own counsel about what sleeps beneath its surface, and why some of its dead stay warm. The snow cracked, and then it waited. Arapahoe Basin sits at the eastern edge of the Continental Divide, its base area at 10,780 feet, making it one of the highest ski resorts in North America. The terrain rises steeply from the parking lot to a ridgeline that exceeds 13,000 feet, exposing slopes to wind, cold, and snowpack conditions that demand constant vigilance from the ski patrol. The resort has operated since 1946, and its patrol program has trained generations of avalanche professionals who have gone on to work throughout the Rocky Mountain West. In January of 1979, Arapahoe Basin hosted a multi-day avalanche control training exercise for patrol staff from several Colorado ski areas. The program included classroom instruction, field observation, and practical experience with explosive deployment techniques. 15 patrollers participated, ranging from first-year trainees to veterans with over a decade of experience. The incident occurred on the morning of January 23rd during a controlled release exercise on a slope designated as the East Wall, a north-facing aspect that regularly accumulated wind-loaded snow and required frequent attention throughout the season. The exercise was supervised by lead patroller Harold Engstrom, who had worked at Arapahoe Basin for 17 years and was widely regarded as one of the most skilled avalanche technicians in Colorado. The plan was straightforward. A two-person team would deploy a hand charge at a predetermined location in the starting zone, while observers positioned at safe distances documented the results. The slope had been evaluated the previous afternoon and determined to be appropriately loaded for training purposes, enough instability to produce a visible release, but not so much as to create unmanageable risk. At 8:47 that morning, patroller Luis Ocampo placed a hand charge at the designated point and retreated to a safe position. The charge detonated at 8:49. What happened next would not appear in any official record for over 30 years. The explosion produced a visible fracture in the slab, a crack that propagated approximately 200 feet across the starting zone, exactly as expected. Under normal circumstances, the fractured slab would have begun moving immediately, accelerating downslope as gravity overcame the friction holding it in place. The delay between fracture and movement is typically measured in fractions of a second, too brief for human perception to register. The slab on the east wall did not move. Did not? "I saw the crack," wrote trainee Margaret Lundberg, in notes discovered decades later. "It went all the way across. I waited for the slide. Nothing happened. I thought the charge had failed somehow, that maybe it had only cracked the surface without releasing the slab, but the crack was there, clear as day, and the snow just sat there." According to multiple accounts compiled from the handwritten notes, the fractured slab remained stationary for approximately 25 to 30 seconds. During this interval, the 15 observers and supervisors stood in silence, watching a phenomenon that none of them had ever witnessed or heard described in any training material. "I've triggered hundreds of avalanches," Engstrom wrote in his personal notes. "I've seen slabs hang up on terrain features, slow down, speed up, do unexpected things. I've never seen one stop before it started. The physics don't allow for it. Once the slab fractures, gravity takes over. There's no delay, there's no hesitation, except that day there was." Trainee Robert Yazzie, positioned approximately 300 meters from the starting zone, described the interval in terms that would later prove difficult for colleagues to interpret. "I had the strangest feeling while we were waiting," he wrote, "like the mountain was thinking, like something was considering whether to let go. I know that sounds crazy, snow doesn't think, but I swear I could feel something making a decision, and then it decided." At approximately 9:19, 30 seconds after the initial fracture, the slab released. The avalanche ran normally once it began, traveling the expected distance and depositing debris in the predicted runout zone. The slide was neither unusually large nor unusually small. Apart from the delay, every aspect of its behavior matched the training exercise parameters. Engstrom called the group together after the debris settled. According to notes from multiple participants, he asked each observer to describe what they had witnessed. All 15 accounts agreed on the essential facts. The fracture had occurred, the slab had not moved, and approximately half a minute had passed before the release. Harold asked us what we thought happened, wrote Ocampo, who had placed the charge. Nobody had an answer. Someone suggested the slab might have been anchored by a rock outcropping we couldn't see. Someone else said maybe the weak layer had partially rebonded after the explosion. Harold listened to all of it. Then he said something I'll never forget. He said, "I've been watching these slopes for 17 years. I know when snow is ready to move. That snow was ready. It just didn't move when it was supposed to. And I can't tell you why, because I don't think there's a scientific answer." The training exercise continued for 2 more days without further anomalies. All participants completed their certifications. The event was considered a success by program administrators. The seasonal avalanche report for Arapahoe Basin, submitted to the Colorado Avalanche Information Center in May of 1979, documented 37 controlled releases conducted during the winter season. The January 23rd exercise was listed among them. No mention was made of unusual delay, hesitation, or any deviation from expected avalanche behavior. "We talked about whether to include it," Engstrom wrote, in notes dated several months after the incident. "I decided against it. What would we say, that the avalanche waited, that it hesitated? No one would believe us, and even if they did, what would they do with that information? It doesn't fit any model. It doesn't change any protocol. It's just something that happened that we can't explain." The 15 participants dispersed after the training concluded, returning to their respective ski areas across Colorado. Several went on to long careers in avalanche safety and patrol work. None of them, according to available records, ever discussed the January 23rd incident publicly. Margaret Lundberg left ski patrol in 1983 to pursue a career in forestry. She kept her training notes in a box of personal papers that she donated to the Colorado Mountain Club archives in 2011, 2 years before her death. The notes were cataloged but not examined in detail until 2017, when an archivist preparing a historical exhibit on Colorado avalanche work discovered the January 23rd account. The archivist, Jennifer Holgan, contacted surviving participants to verify the account's accuracy. Of the 15 original observers, 7 were still living. 4 agreed to discuss the incident. Their recollections, recorded in interviews conducted in 2018, remained consistent with the original notes. "I've thought about it probably once a week for the last 40 years, said Robert Yazzie, then 72, and retired from a career in environmental consulting. "Every time I see an avalanche on television or read about one in the news, I think about that morning on the east wall, the way the crack just hung there, the way everything stopped. I've asked myself 1,000 times what I really saw, and every time I come back to the same answer. I saw something that shouldn't have been possible." Luis Ocampo, who had placed the charge, offered a more measured assessment. "I'm a practical person. I believe in physics, in cause and effect. I don't go in for mystical explanations. But I also know what I witnessed. That slab fractured completely. It should have moved immediately. It didn't. I've spent 40 years trying to find a scientific reason, and I haven't found one. At some point, you have to accept that some things don't have explanations. You just have to live with not knowing." Harold Engstrom died in 1997 without ever publicly discussing the incident. His personal notes, discovered by his daughter while settling his estate, were donated to the same archive that held Lundberg's papers. Among them was a final reflection on the East Wall event, dated December of 1996, approximately 1 year before his death. "I've worked with snow my entire adult life," he wrote. "I've studied it, measured it, tried to understand it. Snow is not alive. Snow does not make decisions. Snow follows rules, gravity, temperature, crystal structure, layer bonding. I know this. I've built my career on this knowledge," he continued. "But on January 23, 1979, I watched snow break every rule I knew. I watched it fracture and not fall. I watched it wait. And in those 30 seconds, I felt something I've never been able to name. Not fear exactly, something older than fear. The feeling you get when you realize that the world is larger and stranger than any of your models can account for. The final line of his notes read, "The snow decided to fall. That's what I saw. I don't know who or what made the decision. I only know that for half a minute something held that mountain in place, and then it let go." The east wall at Arapahoe Basin continues to be monitored and controlled each winter. Patrol teams deploy charges, trigger releases, and document results according to protocols refined over decades of practice. The slopes behave predictably, following the physics that govern snow under stress. No further delays have been officially reported. But patrollers who work the east wall sometimes pause after a charge detonates, watching the fracture line for a moment longer than strictly necessary, just in case, just to see if the mountain needs a moment to decide. The avalanche buried the dead twice. Fremont Pass crosses the Continental Divide at 11,318 feet, connecting Leadville to the resort town of Copper Mountain along Highway 91. The pass takes its name from John C. Fremont, the explorer and military officer whose 19th century expeditions mapped much of the American West, though Fremont himself likely never crossed this particular saddle. The name was applied later, part of the general tendency to attach famous names to Colorado geography during the mining boom years. The terrain surrounding the pass has been shaped by both geology and industry. Abandoned mining operations dot the high valleys. The Climax molybdenum mine, once the largest of its kind in the world, sits just below the summit, its tailings ponds and processing facilities visible from the highway. The mountains here are riddled with tunnels, shafts, and the remnants of settlements that thrived briefly on extracted wealth before the veins ran dry or the markets collapsed. Avalanche paths cross the highway corridor in multiple locations, their runout zones marked by the absence of mature trees and the presence of bent, twisted vegetation that speaks to the regular passage of moving snow. The Colorado Department of Transportation maintains an active control program along the route, but natural releases still occur, particularly during heavy storm cycles when snowpack instability outpaces human intervention. On the morning of April 3, 2011, a natural avalanche released from a northeast-facing slope approximately 1 mile north of the pass summit. The slide was substantial, an estimated 20,000 cubic meters of debris that crossed Highway 91 and came to rest against the opposite hillside, burying both lanes to a depth of approximately 15 feet. The highway had been closed since the previous evening due to storm conditions. No vehicles were caught in the slide. Recovery operations began the following morning under clear skies and cold temperatures. CDOT crews worked with heavy equipment to clear the roadway, while search personnel conducted standard sweeps of the debris field to ensure no unreported travelers had been buried. The work was routine, methodical, and expected to conclude within 48 hours. On the afternoon of April 4th, equipment operator Denise Yellowbird struck something solid approximately 6 feet below the surface near the eastern edge of the debris field. Assuming she had hit a tree trunk or rock outcropping, she signaled for hand crews to investigate. What they uncovered was not natural debris. It was a wooden marker, a rectangular plank approximately 18 inches tall and 6 inches wide, carved from weathered pine and sharpened to a point at one end as though intended to be driven into the ground. The surface bore a single word carved in block letters, Hendricks. Within the next 3 hours, 17 additional markers were recovered from locations scattered throughout the debris field. Each was constructed identically: weathered pine, sharpened point, single name carved into the face. The names varied in length and apparent origin, some Anglo-Saxon, some Germanic, some Spanish, some that did not clearly correspond to any linguistic tradition. "I thought at first it was some kind of memorial," said Search Team Coordinator Victor Sandoval in his incident report, like maybe someone had placed markers for avalanche victims over the years and the slide had dug them up. But they were scattered across the entire debris field. Some were near the surface, some were buried deep. There was no pattern to their placement, and they were all intact, no damage, no rot, like they'd been made yesterday. The markers were collected and transported to the Lake County Sheriff's Department for documentation and analysis. Initial examination confirmed that all 18 were constructed from the same type of wood, lodgepole pine, and displayed similar weathering patterns suggesting comparable age. The carving technique was consistent across all markers, suggesting a single creator or a coordinated effort. The names were transcribed and submitted to the Colorado Avalanche Information Center for comparison against historical fatality records. 14 matches were confirmed within 72 hours. Hendricks corresponded to William Hendricks, killed in an avalanche near Breckenridge in 1923. Montoya matched Esperanza Montoya, buried in a slide above Silverton in 1941. Erickson aligned with Lars Erickson, a miner killed near Ophir in 1907. The list continued. Names attached to dates spanning over a century of Colorado avalanche history, deaths documented in newspaper archives, coroner records, and mining company files. Each of the 14 identified individuals had died in a different location, none anywhere near Fremont Pass. Their deaths ranged from 1902 to 1997. They shared no apparent connection beyond their common cause of death: burial by avalanche. The remaining 4 names, Talbot, Kreshnik, Inutek, and Zaslow, could not be matched to any individual in any available database. Searches of census records, immigration documents, military archives, and genealogical databases produced no results. The names appeared to belong to no one who had ever been officially documented. "We expanded the search nationally, then internationally," said CAIC Research Coordinator Amanda Reinhold. "We checked Canadian records, European records, anywhere that might have sent immigrants to Colorado mining communities. Nothing. Those 4 names don't appear anywhere. It's like they never existed." The markers themselves were subjected to forensic analysis by the Colorado Bureau of Investigation. Carbon dating of the wood samples returned results that complicated any straightforward explanation. The pine had been cut approximately 120 years earlier, placing its origin in the early 1890s. Toolmark analysis confirmed that the carving had been done with hand tools consistent with that era, chisels and knives rather than modern power equipment. The depth and consistency of the lettering suggested a skilled craftsman working with care and deliberation. "Whoever made these markers knew what they were doing," wrote CBI forensic specialist Dr. Ramona Fitzgerald in her analysis. "The craftsmanship is excellent. The wood selection is appropriate for outdoor use. These were not hastily assembled objects. They were created to last." But the 1890s dating raised an impossible question. How could markers carved over a century ago bear the names of individuals who would not die for decades? William Hendricks was killed in 1923, 30 years after the markers were apparently created. Esperanza Montoya died in 1941. The most recent identified victim, a snowmobiler named Craig Peterson, was killed near Vail in 1997, more than a century after the wood was cut. "The dating must be wrong," suggested one investigator during a case review meeting documented in Sheriff's Department files. "Maybe the wood was old, but the carving was recent. Someone found old lumber and carved the names after the deaths occurred." Dr. Fitzgerald's analysis addressed this possibility. The weathering patterns on the carved surfaces are consistent with the weathering patterns on the unmarked surfaces. If the carving had been done recently on old wood, we would expect to see differential weathering, fresh cuts versus aged surfaces. We don't see that. The carving appears to be as old as the wood itself. The investigation stalled without resolution. The markers were cataloged, photographed, and placed in evidence storage at the Lake County Sheriff's Department. No charges were filed. No suspects were identified. The case was classified as unexplained property discovery and administratively closed in September of 2011. Local historians attempted to identify potential creators based on the 1890s timeframe. The area around Fremont Pass had supported several mining communities during that period, including the town of Kokomo, which had been largely abandoned by the early 20th century as ore deposits diminished. Records from these communities were fragmentary. Fires, floods, and simple neglect had destroyed much of the documentation from that era. One theory proposed that the markers had been created by a religious or fraternal organization that memorialized avalanche victims as part of some private ritual. No evidence of such an organization was found in surviving records. Another theory suggested the markers were an elaborate hoax, someone with access to antique wood and period-appropriate tools who had researched avalanche fatalities and created the markers as a macabre art project. This theory could not explain how the markers had come to be buried throughout a debris field in locations that would have required precise knowledge of where the avalanche would deposit its contents. You'd have to know exactly where the slide would run and exactly where it would stop, said Sandoval. Then you'd have to bury 18 markers at specific locations throughout that area before the avalanche happened. It's not possible. No one can predict that precisely where debris will settle. The 4 unidentified names have continued to resist explanation. Amateur researchers have proposed various theories. Victims of undocumented avalanches whose deaths were never recorded, individuals known only by nicknames or aliases, or names from languages or cultures that did not leave written records in Colorado archives. One researcher working independently in 2019 noted that Inutek appeared to be an Inuit name, suggesting a possible connection to indigenous peoples from far outside the Colorado region. How such a name would appear on a marker carved in the Colorado mountains in the 1890s remains unexplained. The markers remain in evidence storage. Periodically, researchers request access to examine them, searching for details that might have been overlooked. The names stare back from the weathered wood, offering no answers. 14 people whose deaths were recorded. 4 people who may have never existed. And somewhere in the 1890s, someone carved their names on wooden stakes and placed them in the mountains, names of the dead and names of the not yet dead, and names of those who left no trace except on markers that should not exist. Fremont Pass reopened 2 days after the slide was cleared. Traffic resumed its flow between Leadville and Copper Mountain. The debris field consolidated, melted, and eventually disappeared into the spring runoff. But the names persist: Hendricks, Montoya, Erickson, Talbot, Kreshnik, Inutek, Zaslow. 14 documented, 4 unknown, 18 markers carved from wood that predates the deaths they commemorate. And a question that no one has been able to answer: who knew what the mountains would take, and when, and from whom? The snow falls fresh each winter on Fremont Pass, covering whatever lies beneath. Some things stay buried. Some things surface when the mountain decides to release them. And some names, it seems, were written down long before the people who bore them ever learned to be afraid of the snow. The road breaks first. Then the mountain follows. Imogene Pass climbs to 13,114 feet between Ouray and Telluride, making it one of the highest drivable passes in the United States. The road, if it can be called that, is an unpaved track carved into terrain so steep and unstable that it remains closed to all but the most capable four-wheel drive vehicles, and then only during the brief summer months when snow melt reveals the route. In winter, the pass belongs entirely to the elements, inaccessible and unmonitored, its switchbacks buried beneath accumulations that can exceed 30 feet in the deepest sections. The pass was originally constructed in the 1870s to serve the mining camps that dotted the San Juan Mountains during the silver boom. Pack mules hauled ore along its precarious grades, and more than a few men and animals fell to their deaths on the exposed traverses. When the mines closed, the road fell into disrepair, maintained only sporadically by county crews who recognized its value as a summer recreation route and emergency connection between the two valleys it linked. The switchback in question sits approximately 2 miles below the summit on the Ouray side, at an elevation of roughly 12,300 feet. It is not the steepest section of the road nor the most exposed. Visually, it is unremarkable. A hairpin turn carved into a modest slope, stabilized by a low retaining wall constructed of local stone sometime in the early 20th century. But for at least 70 years, this switchback has exhibited a behavior that no engineer has been able to explain. The pattern was first documented by San Juan County Road Supervisor Elmer Johansson in the summer of 1954. During a routine inspection following snowmelt, Johansson discovered a crack running across the road surface at the switchback's apex, a fracture approximately 8 feet long and 2 inches wide, cutting cleanly through the compacted gravel and extending into the underlying soil. "It looked like someone had taken a knife and drawn a line across the road," Johansson wrote in his maintenance log. "Clean edges, no crumbling, no sign of what caused it. We filled it and tamped it down and figured that was the end of it." 7 days later, an avalanche released on the slope directly above the switchback, a slide that deposited debris across the road and partially buried the retaining wall. The timing was noted, but not considered significant. The following summer, the crack reappeared in the same location. 7 days later, another avalanche struck the same slope. By 1960, the pattern had repeated 5 times. Johansson began keeping informal records, noting the date each crack appeared and the date of the subsequent avalanche. His records, preserved in San Juan County archives, show a consistent 7-day interval across all documented incidents. "I showed the records to the county engineer," Johansson told a local newspaper in a 1973 interview, by then retired and willing to speak publicly about what he had observed. He said, "It was coincidence." I said, "Coincidence happens once or twice, not 5 times in a row." He said the mountain must be settling in a way that affected both the road and the snowpack above it. I asked him to explain the 7-day interval. He couldn't. The phenomenon continued through the 1960s and 70s, documented sporadically by successive road crews who learned of the pattern from predecessors. Some dismissed it as local folklore. Others took it seriously enough to schedule inspections specifically to check for the crack's appearance during late winter and early spring. In 1978, San Juan County contracted with the Colorado Geological Survey to conduct an assessment of the switchback and surrounding terrain. The assessment, completed in the summer of 1979, examined soil composition, subsurface water flow, frost heave patterns, and slope stability. The findings were inconclusive. The road surface shows evidence of repeated fracturing consistent with thermal expansion and contraction cycles, the report concluded. However, the regularity and location of the fractures cannot be fully explained by standard geotechnical models. The correlation with subsequent avalanche activity on adjacent slopes is noted, but falls outside the scope of this assessment. A supplementary analysis of the avalanche starting zone above the switchback found no unusual characteristics: standard snowpack behavior, typical terrain features, predictable loading patterns. Nothing that would explain why this particular slope released with such regularity, or why its releases consistently followed the appearance of the road crack by exactly 1 week. Sheriff Franklin Benavides served San Juan County from 1982 to 2004, spending over 2 decades in a jurisdiction where avalanches claimed more lives than any other natural hazard. He became aware of the switchback pattern early in his tenure and took an unofficial interest in tracking its occurrences. "I wasn't a scientist," Benavides said in a 2018 interview conducted for a regional oral history project. "I was a cop. But I knew how to keep records, and I knew when something didn't add up, so I started my own log. Every time the road crew reported that crack, I wrote it down. Every time an avalanche hit that slope, I wrote it down. After 20 years, I had 19 data points, and every single one showed the same pattern. Crack appears, 7 days pass, slide releases." Benavides attempted to share his findings with state officials on multiple occasions. His correspondence, preserved in his personal papers, shows a pattern of polite dismissal. "They always had an explanation," he recalled. "Coincidence, observer bias, small sample size. I invited the state climatologist to come down and see for himself. He never came. I contacted the Avalanche Center in Boulder. They said they'd look into it. I never heard back." The crack continued to appear. In 1989, road crew foreman Alice Yazzie documented the fracture's emergence on March 12th. She photographed the crack from multiple angles and measured its dimensions. 8 feet 4 inches long, 1 7/8 inches wide, running in a straight line precisely perpendicular to the road's direction of travel. On March 19th, 7 days later, an avalanche released from the slope above, running over 600 vertical feet and depositing debris that would not be cleared until the summer thaw. "I took those photographs to the county commission meeting," Yazzie said in a 2012 interview. "I showed them the pattern. I asked for funding to install monitoring equipment, seismographs, stress sensors, anything that might help us understand what was happening. They said there wasn't budget for it. They said the road was closed in winter anyway, so what did it matter?" She paused before continuing. "It mattered to me. Something was trying to tell us something. The mountain was giving us a warning, and we were ignoring it because we couldn't explain it." The most recent documented occurrence took place in March of 2019. A crack appeared on the switchback on March 8th, observed by a backcountry skier who had accessed the area via the Telluride side of the pass. Photographs posted to social media showed the familiar pattern: clean edges, perpendicular orientation, approximately 8 feet in length. On March 15th, an avalanche released on the slope above, the 19th documented instance of the 7-day pattern since Elmer Johansson's first observation in 1954. No monitoring equipment has ever been installed at the switchback. No formal study of the phenomenon has been conducted. The road continues to be repaired each summer, the crack filled and compacted, only to reappear the following winter or spring. Sheriff Benavides, now 81 years old, still lives in Ouray. He maintains his log of observations, updated each spring with whatever information reaches him through former colleagues and local contacts. "People ask me what I think causes it," he said at the conclusion of his 2018 interview. "I tell them I don't know. I'm not sure anyone knows. But I've spent 40 years watching this pattern repeat, and I've learned one thing. The mountain gives warnings, not in words, not in ways we can easily understand, but it gives them. That crack is a warning. 7 days before every slide, the road tells us what's coming." He looked out the window toward the mountains visible in the distance. The question isn't whether the warning is real. The question is whether we're smart enough to listen. The switchback remains, carved into the mountainside above Ouray, repaired each summer and abandoned each winter. Snow buries it in December and reveals it again in June. The cycle continues, unbroken for 70 years. And somewhere beneath the frozen surface, in soil and rock that have witnessed centuries of human ambition and natural indifference, something continues to fracture on its own schedule. A crack that appears without explanation and precedes disaster with perfect consistency. The road breaks first, then the mountain follows. 7 days, every time. No one knows why. But the pattern holds, and the old-timers in Ouray know to start counting when word comes down that the crack has appeared again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and then the snow begins to move. The road breaks first, then the mountain follows. Imogene Pass climbs to 13,114 feet between Ouray and Telluride, making it one of the highest drivable passes in the United States. The road, if it can be called that, is an unpaved track carved into terrain so steep and unstable that it remains closed to all but the most capable four-wheel drive vehicles, and then only during the brief summer months when snow melt reveals the route. In winter, the pass belongs entirely to the elements, inaccessible and unmonitored, its switchbacks buried beneath accumulations that can exceed 30 feet in the deepest sections. The pass was originally constructed in the 1870s to serve the mining camps that dotted the San Juan Mountains during the silver boom. Pack mules hauled ore along its precarious grades, and more than a few men and animals fell to their deaths on the exposed traverses. When the mines closed, the road fell into disrepair, maintained only sporadically by county crews who recognized its value as a summer recreation route and emergency connection between the two valleys it linked. The switchback in question sits approximately 2 miles below the summit on the Ouray side, at an elevation of roughly 12,300 feet. It is not the steepest section of the road nor the most exposed. Visually, it is unremarkable. A hairpin turn carved into a modest slope, stabilized by a low retaining wall constructed of local stone sometime in the early 20th century. But for at least 70 years, this switchback has exhibited a behavior that no engineer has been able to explain. The pattern was first documented by San Juan County Road Supervisor Elmer Johansson in the summer of 1954. During a routine inspection following snow melt, Johansson discovered a crack running across the road surface at the switchback's apex, a fracture approximately 8 feet long and 2 inches wide, cutting cleanly through the compacted gravel and extending into the underlying soil. It looked like someone had taken a knife and drawn a line across the road, Johansson wrote in his maintenance log. Clean edges, no crumbling, no sign of what caused it. We filled it and tamped it down and figured that was the end of it. 7 days later, an avalanche released on the slope directly above the switchback, a slide that deposited debris across the road and partially buried the retaining wall. The timing was noted, but not considered significant. The following summer, the crack reappeared in the same location. 7 days later, another avalanche struck the same slope. By 1960, the pattern had repeated 5 times. Johansson began keeping informal records, noting the date each crack appeared and the date of the subsequent avalanche. His records, preserved in San Juan County archives, show a consistent 7-day interval across all documented incidents. I showed the records to the county engineer, Johansson told a local newspaper in a 1973 interview, by then retired and willing to speak publicly about what he had observed. He said it was coincidence. I said, coincidence happens once or twice, not 5 times in a row. He said the mountain must be settling in a way that affected both the road and the snowpack above it. I asked him to explain the 7-day interval. He couldn't. The phenomenon continued through the 1960s and 70s, documented sporadically by successive road crews who learned of the pattern from predecessors. Some dismissed it as local folklore. Others took it seriously enough to schedule inspections specifically to check for the crack's appearance during late winter and early spring. In 1978, San Juan County contracted with the Colorado Geological Survey to conduct an assessment of the switchback and surrounding terrain. The assessment, completed in the summer of 1979, examined soil composition, subsurface water flow, frost heave patterns, and slope stability. The findings were inconclusive. The road surface shows evidence of repeated fracturing consistent with thermal expansion and contraction cycles, the report concluded. However, the regularity and location of the fractures cannot be fully explained by standard geotechnical models. The correlation with subsequent avalanche activity on adjacent slopes is noted, but falls outside the scope of this assessment. A supplementary analysis of the avalanche starting zone above the switchback found no unusual characteristics: standard snowpack behavior, typical terrain features, predictable loading patterns. Nothing that would explain why this particular slope released with such regularity, or why its releases consistently followed the appearance of the road crack by exactly 1 week. Sheriff Franklin Benavides served San Juan County from 1982 to 2004, spending over 2 decades in a jurisdiction where avalanches claimed more lives than any other natural hazard. He became aware of the switchback pattern early in his tenure and took an unofficial interest in tracking its occurrences. "I wasn't a scientist," Benavides said in a 2018 interview conducted for a regional oral history project. "I was a cop. But I knew how to keep records, and I knew when something didn't add up, so I started my own log. Every time the road crew reported that crack, I wrote it down. Every time an avalanche hit that slope, I wrote it down. After 20 years, I had 19 data points, and every single one showed the same pattern. Crack appears, 7 days pass, slide releases." Benavides attempted to share his findings with state officials on multiple occasions. His correspondence, preserved in his personal papers, shows a pattern of polite dismissal. "They always had an explanation," he recalled. "Coincidence, observer bias, small sample size. I invited the state climatologist to come down and see for himself. He never came. I contacted the Avalanche Center in Boulder. They said they'd look into it. I never heard back." The crack continued to appear. In 1989, road crew foreman Alice Yazzie documented the fracture's emergence on March 12th. She photographed the crack from multiple angles and measured its dimensions: 8 feet 4 inches long, 1 7/8 inches wide, running in a straight line precisely perpendicular to the road's direction of travel. On March 19th, 7 days later, an avalanche released from the slope above, running over 600 vertical feet and depositing debris that would not be cleared until the summer thaw. "I took those photographs to the county commission meeting," Yazzie said in a 2012 interview. "I showed them the pattern. I asked for funding to install monitoring equipment, seismographs, stress sensors, anything that might help us understand what was happening. They said there wasn't budget for it. They said the road was closed in winter anyway, so what did it matter?" She paused before continuing. "It mattered to me. Something was trying to tell us something. The mountain was giving us a warning, and we were ignoring it because we couldn't explain it." The most recent documented occurrence took place in March of 2019. A crack appeared on the switchback on March 8th, observed by a backcountry skier who had accessed the area via the Telluride side of the pass. Photographs posted to social media showed the familiar pattern: clean edges, perpendicular orientation, approximately 8 feet in length. On March 15th, an avalanche released on the slope above, the 19th documented instance of the 7-day pattern since Elmer Johansson's first observation in 1954. No monitoring equipment has ever been installed at the switchback. No formal study of the phenomenon has been conducted. The road continues to be repaired each summer, the crack filled and compacted, only to reappear the following winter or spring. Sheriff Benavides, now 81 years old, still lives in Ouray. He maintains his log of observations, updated each spring with whatever information reaches him through former colleagues and local contacts. "People ask me what I think causes it," he said at the conclusion of his 2018 interview. "I tell them I don't know. I'm not sure anyone knows. But I've spent 40 years watching this pattern repeat, and I've learned one thing. The mountain gives warnings, not in words, not in ways we can easily understand, but it gives them. That crack is a warning. 7 days before every slide, the road tells us what's coming. He looked out the window toward the mountains visible in the distance. The question isn't whether the warning is real. The question is whether we're smart enough to listen. The switchback remains, carved into the mountainside above Ouray, repaired each summer and abandoned each winter. Snow buries it in December and reveals it again in June. The cycle continues, unbroken for 70 years. And somewhere beneath the frozen surface, in soil and rock that have witnessed centuries of human ambition and natural indifference, something continues to fracture on its own schedule. A crack that appears without explanation and precedes disaster with perfect consistency. The road breaks first, then the mountain follows. 7 days, every time, no one knows why. But the pattern holds, and the old-timers in Ouray know to start counting when word comes down that the crack has appeared again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and then the snow begins to move. She was there every time. She remembers nothing. The East Vale backcountry extends beyond the ski area boundary into a network of drainages, bowls, and ridgelines that attract experienced tourers seeking terrain more challenging than what the resort offers. Access points along the South Frontage Road lead into Vale's backcountry gates, marked exits from the ski area that funnel traffic into avalanche-prone terrain where rescue is not guaranteed and personal responsibility is absolute. The slopes here have claimed lives with regularity, despite the sophisticated forecasting and education programs that have made Colorado's avalanche awareness among the best in the world. The woman's name is Catherine Aldridge. She has lived in Eagle County since 1987, working variously as a property manager, bookkeeper, and seasonal employee at several local businesses. She has no formal backcountry training. She does not ski. According to friends and colleagues, she has expressed no particular interest in mountains, winter sports, or outdoor recreation of any kind. And yet her name appears in 3 separate avalanche incident reports spanning 26 years. The first documented occurrence took place on February 2, 1991. A natural avalanche released in the Mushroom Bowl area of the East Vale backcountry, partially burying 2 skiers who were subsequently rescued by their touring partners. No fatalities occurred. The incident was documented by the Vale Mountain Rescue Group, whose report included statements from all parties present. Among those statements was one from Catherine Aldridge, listed as a witness, non-participant. According to the report, Aldridge had been standing near the runout zone at the time of the slide, approximately 300 meters from the burial site. She was not part of the touring group and could not explain how she had reached that location. Her statement, transcribed by rescue volunteer Dennis Harmon, read as follows. I heard a sound like fabric tearing. Then I saw someone standing at the top, right where the snow broke. A figure, dark against the white. And then a voice said, "It's time to come down." I don't know if the figure said it or if it came from somewhere else. Then the snow started moving. Harmon noted in his documentation that Aldridge appeared disoriented but calm, and was unable to provide details about how she had accessed the backcountry terrain without skis or snowshoes. She was escorted to the trailhead by rescue personnel and declined medical evaluation. No follow-up investigation was conducted. The statement was filed with the incident report and archived. 13 years later, on January 19, 2004, an avalanche in the adjacent Ptarmigan Ridge area killed one skier and seriously injured another. The slide was triggered by the victims themselves while ascending a slope rated as considerable danger by that day's avalanche forecast. Search and rescue operations recovered the deceased victim after approximately 2 hours of searching. The incident report, compiled by the Eagle County Sheriff's Office in coordination with Vail Mountain Rescue, again included a witness statement from Catherine Aldridge. Her statement was transcribed by Deputy Marcus Yellowhorse. "I heard a sound like fabric tearing. Then I saw someone standing at the top, right where the snow broke, a figure, dark against the white. And then a voice said, 'It's time to come down.' I don't know if the figure said it or if it came from somewhere else. Then the snow started moving." The wording was identical to her 1991 statement, word for word, comma for comma. Deputy Yellowhorse, unaware of the earlier report, documented Aldridge's presence as a witness, non-participant, and noted that she had been found approximately 250 meters from the debris field, standing motionless in waist-deep snow without skis, snowshoes, or winter survival equipment. Her clothing was inadequate for the conditions, a light jacket, street shoes, no gloves. Yet she displayed no signs of hypothermia or frostbite, despite an estimated exposure time of at least 90 minutes. She seemed confused about where she was, Yellowhorse wrote in his supplementary notes. When I asked how she'd gotten there, she said she didn't know. When I asked what she'd seen, she gave the statement transcribed above. When I read it back to her, she said she didn't remember saying it. Aldridge was transported to Vail Valley Medical Center for evaluation. Medical records from that visit, later obtained by investigators, showed no physical abnormalities, no cognitive impairment, and no psychiatric indicators that would explain her presence in the backcountry or her apparent amnesia. She was released that evening with no diagnosis. The connection between the 1991 and 2004 incidents was not discovered until 2017, when a graduate researcher named Tomas Padilla began compiling a database of Colorado avalanche witness statements as part of a study on trauma memory and eyewitness reliability. Padilla noticed the identical wording immediately. "I thought it was a data entry error," he said in a 2020 interview. "Someone had duplicated the statement from one report into another. But then I checked the original documents, different handwriting, different dates, different transcribers. The same woman had given the exact same statement 13 years apart." Before Padilla could pursue the anomaly further, a third incident occurred. On March 12, 2017, a large natural avalanche released in the East Vail backcountry near Commando Bowl, narrowly missing a group of ski tourers who had paused in a protected location to eat lunch. The slide was among the largest recorded in the area that season, with a crown fracture exceeding 8 feet in depth and a runout that reached the valley floor. The touring group, shaken but uninjured, contacted search and rescue to report the incident. Rescue personnel arriving at the scene encountered a woman standing alone at the edge of the debris field. Her name was Catherine Aldridge. Her statement, transcribed by rescue team leader Mariana Espinoza, read, "I heard a sound like fabric tearing. Then I saw someone standing at the top, right where the snow broke, a figure, dark against the white. And then a voice said, 'It's time to come down.' I don't know if the figure said it or if it came from somewhere else. Then the snow started moving." Identical. Again. Espinoza, a veteran of over 200 rescue operations, had been briefed on the historical anomaly by Padilla, who had shared his preliminary findings with the Vail Mountain Rescue Group earlier that winter. She was prepared to ask follow-up questions. "I asked her if she remembered giving this same statement before," Espinoza said. "She looked at me like I was speaking a foreign language. She said she'd never been in an avalanche before. She said she didn't know why she was there. She asked me how she'd gotten so far from town." Aldridge was again transported for medical evaluation. Again, no abnormalities were found. Again, she was released without diagnosis. Investigators subsequently confirmed that Catherine Aldridge had been physically present in Eagle County on all 3 dates, that she had no documented transportation to any of the incident locations, and that in each case she had been found in terrain requiring significant effort to access terrain she had apparently traversed without appropriate equipment or, seemingly, any memory of doing so. Interviews with friends and family members revealed no history of sleepwalking, fugue states, dissociative episodes, or any medical condition that might explain the phenomenon. "Catherine is the most ordinary person I know," said longtime friend and co-worker Deborah Nez. "She goes to work, goes home, watches television. She doesn't hike, she doesn't ski. She's never expressed any interest in the mountains. When I heard about this, I thought there must be another Catherine Aldridge, but there isn't. It's her, and I have no idea how that's possible." Aldridge herself has consistently declined interview requests. Through an attorney, she issued a statement in 2018. "I have no explanation for the incidents described in the reports. I have no memory of being present at any avalanche. I have no connection to the East Vale backcountry. I consider the matter closed and ask that my privacy be respected." The matter, however, remains open in other respects. Tomas Padilla completed his research project in 2019, but omitted the Aldridge anomaly from his published findings, citing insufficient data and the risk of sensationalizing a scientifically inexplicable case. His personal notes, shared with colleagues, reveal his continued preoccupation with the phenomenon. "3 identical statements across 26 years," he wrote. "The same sequence of events described in the same words. A figure at the crown line, a voice saying the same phrase, and a witness who has no memory of witnessing anything. Either this is the most elaborate hoax I've ever encountered, or something is happening that our current frameworks can't accommodate." The phrase, "it's time to come down," has not been reported in any other Colorado avalanche witness statement. The description of a dark figure at the crown line matches no known phenomenon associated with avalanche release. The voice Aldridge described hearing has no apparent source. And Catherine Aldridge, 63 years old now, still living in Eagle County, still working part-time jobs and watching television in the evenings, continues to have no memory of the mountains that have somehow claimed her as their witness 3 times over. The East Vale backcountry remains popular with tourers each winter. Avalanches continue to release, sometimes harmlessly, sometimes with fatal consequences. Rescue teams continue to respond, document, and file their reports. No one has seen Catherine Aldridge in the backcountry since 2017. But some rescue workers have begun, including an unusual question in their witness interviews, a question that wasn't part of any official protocol until Mariana Espinoza suggested it informally in 2018. "Have you ever given a statement about an avalanche before?" Most witnesses say no. All of them remember, so far. The next avalanche in the East Vale backcountry will occur according to its own schedule, following the physics of snowpack and terrain and weather that govern all such events. The forecasters will issue their warnings. The tourers will make their decisions. The snow will do what snow does. And somewhere in Eagle County, a woman who does not ski and does not hike and has never expressed any interest in mountains will go about her ordinary day, until perhaps she finds herself standing in deep snow again, watching the white world come apart, hearing a voice she will not remember say words that have not changed in 26 years. "It's time to come down." 3 times spoken, 3 times forgotten, and the mountains, patient as ever, keeping count.